Washio was an ugly old virgin who wasted his good years raising monsters. However, his miserable life changed when the monsters transformed into freaky baddies who would do anything to have him as their sugar daddy. It all began in the middle of a vast sea on a small sandy island, where, on a shore, a small octopus inquired about what snow was. Our middle-aged protagonist's teacher, Washio, explained that water must be generated and condensed simultaneously to achieve snow. As soon as he answered the question, the octopus raised her hands and revealed her deepest desire, saying she would love to transform into a human when she's grown. The octopus went on to explain that when she finally became a human, all she would love to do was develop some massive plot with her teacher, Washio. Hearing this, Washio was stunned, wondering how his ugly face was raising up monsters instead of chicks. Noticing his surprised expression, the octopus assumed Washio hated her because of her cringy appearance. But then, Washio gently took hold of her face and said it wasn't true, reassuring her there was no shame in having hopeful dreams. 10 years passed, and the scene transitioned to an academy in the middle of the city. Inside the academy, we find two ugly-ass girls complaining about how stressful the day had been and the need to rush home to cool off. As they headed home, one of them accidentally bumped into an old, senile man who looked like he was suffering from an addiction. Frightened, the girls started to sweat, and they bolted as fast as their legs could carry them, shouting that the old man smelled worse than rotten fish. Old man Washio then sniffed his underarms, puzzled as to why the girls had called him a smelling pig. After all, he had taken a bath that morning and was wearing freshly washed clothes. However, he ignored the mean girls and began walking to the teacher's staff room. That was when he noticed something odd. A pretty chick with two separate countries on her chest carrying a piece of luggage. Startled, he approached the mummy milker and asked if it was her first time in the academy. The girl immediately stared at him like she had just seen a ghost and then surprisingly embraced his skinny body. Washio almost froze to death because the weight of her giant plot cannons were crushing his body. He wondered if it was a prank because, come on, a random chick would never hug an old, disgusting man out of nowhere. However, he noticed they were creating a scene at that moment, and the students were already calling him an old, cultured creep. So, he pushed the crazy girl away from his body slightly. The confused girl then asked for directions to the head teacher's office, saying she had forgotten to bring her map. So, Washio gave her directions to the teacher's office, but advised that next time, she could find the map of the academy in her identification book. Hearing this, she searched for her identification book in her luggage, but still couldn't find it. Noticing how sad the girl was for not finding the book, Washio knelt before her and said people tend to make hasty decisions when they act rashly. He touched her head and told her not to be sad because mistakes happen. Upon hearing the advice, the girl's eyes glistened with gratitude, and she thanked him for being so caring. Holding her head, she muttered to herself to keep calm and avoid making unnecessary mistakes. Washio said exactly and informed her that this technique was called wisdom from the past. Washio told her that back when he was an office clerk, he had always applied this technique when he faced difficult problems. He said he had one particular time when he accidentally deleted his data presentation. The girl stared at him awkwardly and asked if an office clerk was some kind of delicious food she could eat. Hearing this, Washio knew the girl must have escaped the asylum, so he quickly bid her farewell and left. As he continued his never-ending journey to the teacher's office, Mrs. Bouncy Plot stared at Washio in confusion, wondering why the old man had not recognized her. Sometime later, Washio finally arrived at the teacher's office. That moment, a fellow elf teacher named Limnoa shoved a questionnaire containing intermediate magic questions to his face and asked him to make corrections where needed. Washio stared at the dude, wondering why his worthless couldn't do it himself. So, Washio told him he would be busy cleaning the residence. However, as Limnoa began to walk away, he told Washio that his filthy excuse wasn't good enough. Limnoa added that the job was perfect for a smelling underachiever like Washio, unlike him, who had won tournaments for the academy with his club, bringing pride not only to the director but the entire school. However, Washio told him that even after bagging trophies for the school, he could never bag a chick. Several hours later, after teaching all day, Washio walked home hungry and exhausted. He stared inside a local bar, longing to have a bottle of beer. But that was when he remembered he was still a useless brokey who couldn't afford any beer. Nothing had changed. Upon entering his residence, he ran into the old housekeeper, who gave him some leftover dinner. The old nosy hag also advised him to get himself a wife who would cook delicious meals for him, so there would always be food anytime he returned from work. However, Washio told the old vegetable to mind her business and concentrate on finding herself a man who would service her old rusty engine instead. Following that, Washio stepped into his filthy shack, which reeked worse than a sewer, sat on his rickety bed, and ate the leftovers given to him. Afterwards, our protagonist took a shower, and it was during that moment of solitude that he reflected on his miserable life. 10 years ago, Washio had just been a hopeless office worker with no plans of getting ahead. He had no girlfriend or wife, just like every loser watching this video. Suddenly, as he returned home late from work one night, he unexpectedly teleported to this strange world. In this world, he was hailed as a hero, but after failing to prevent its destruction, his only success was saving a single spider. However, even after saving the spider, it was taken from him by a mad Frankenstein, who went on to experiment on the spider before his very eyes. In this world, Washio couldn't even have a single moment of peaceful sleep because he kept having terrible nightmares. So, after this terrible failure, Washio decided to be a teacher at the academy. Back in the present, as he walked to his balcony, he pondered on how, even till now, he was still an old bachelor who hadn't achieved anything, and his neutered eggplant had not even clapped any chick. However, he was only able to perform little magic spells here and there. Smoking a cigarette, he thought about his students 10 years ago, his little octopus, and other animals that somehow managed to put a smile on his face back then. The following morning, Washio arrived at the academy feeling refreshed after showering the night before. However, on seeing him, Limnoa asked why he still reeked like an unflushed toilet, which made Washio start sniffing his disgusting body to confirm. Changing the subject entirely, Limnoa informed him that a monster girl would be joining the academy that day. But Washio had absolutely no idea of what she meant by monster girls. Hearing this, Limnoa wondered what disgusting hole the old-smelling creep must have crawled out from. However, he explained that gene mutations of various monsters created monster girls. He further explained that these girls possessed superior intelligence, exceptional physical abilities, and beautiful appearance, surpassing that of young human girls. After this brief lecture, Limnoa turned and said Washio should be aware of all these since he was a professor of biology, which made Washio blush in embarrassment. Limnoa then pointed out that thanks to the talents of these monster girls, the government and high-ranking officials had promised to fund the academy. After saying that, Limnoa leaned toward Washio and mentioned that one of the monster girls that had joined the academy was approaching the door at that moment. Just then, the mummy milker from earlier stepped into the class, and that instant, the director, who looked like a rat literally, welcomed her officially into the academy. The monster girl then introduced herself to the class as Claudia, from the Kraken species, and all the students were mesmerized by the gigantic assets on her chest. The director, however, then assured Claudia that during the week, a teacher would be assigned to her. But Claudia told the short ugly that she had already decided who would be her teacher. After saying that, she moved toward Washio and said, "Long time no see." Without hesitation, she unleashed her octopus tentacles, wrapped him with them, and then asked if he still hadn't recognized her. At first, Washio didn't understand what the girl was talking about. Still, when he stared deeper, he instantly noticed the similarities between her and his little octopus student from 10 years earlier. With that, Claudia smiled and said for the second time, "Long time no see." As she placed her hand on his, Washio instantly recalled that it was the same way the little octopus had placed her tentacles on his hand the very day he had saved her years ago. That instant, Claudia smiled and told Washio that she was his little octopus who had surprisingly transformed into a monster girl. The next day, Washio, running late, rushed to the academy, looking like the most useless loser in the world. Suddenly, he heard someone call his name from behind, so he turned only to realize it was Mrs. Melontopus. Just then, she offered to give him a ride to the academy since he was late. However, Washio was stunned when he didn't spot any bents nearby. Before he could react, Claudia grabbed his hand with her tentacles and dashed toward the academy, leaving Washio flailing helplessly in the air like a fly. Minutes later, they arrived at the academy. So, Washio thanked Claudia for the express transport, saying this was the first time he had arrived early to school that month. In response, Claudia assured him that from then on, she would make it her duty to bring him to school every day. Those words deeply moved Washio as he struggled to grasp the reality that the tiny creature he had once saved had grown so much. While they talked, the rest of the students found their teacher-student relationship very inappropriate. At the same time, Limnoa was dying of jealousy that Claudia had chosen Washio, a rank E professor, to be her teacher instead of a rank A professor like him. But Claudia warned the jealous, unloved idiot not to call her Professor Daddy, a lowly rank E professor. Washio, however, asked Claudia how the 3 days she had spent in the academy had been so far. Claudia replied, saying class had been fun, but the class she enjoyed the most was his biology class because it excited her in ways she couldn't explain. Washio then handed her a form to fill out her chosen career path. He told her that as a monster girl, she had a promising future ahead of her and could even rise to the position of a high-ranking officer if she desired. Clenching her fist, Claudia remarked that she had always suspected that was why they brought her to the academy. She added that her suspicions were confirmed when her classmates, eager to gain favor, kept begging her to recommend them to the king's department. She also added that the teachers had also mentioned something similar earlier on. According to the teachers, she had big potential to be a member of the king's affair, but with such a heavy expectation on her shoulders, she doubted if she would be able to fulfill it. Hearing her concerns, Washio told her that he was not in the perfect condition to advise anyone and was unsure if he was the teacher she needed. Upon hearing this, Claudia's eyes welled up with tears as she told him he was the teacher she had always wanted. However, Washio simply walked away, casually advising her to take it easy, leaving Claudia emotionally overwhelmed. Shortly afterwards, in the cafeteria, Washio headed to the counter to get his usual order. Suddenly, Claudia popped out of nowhere with her tentacles around his hand and commented on how little the food he ordered was. She told him that not eating well was bad for his health, but Washio told her he had no choice but to eat like a beggar since he was broke. After that, Claudia showed Washio her career choice form and said she had filled it out. Just then, Limnoa arrived, snatched the form, and glared with a stormy expression. His voice filled with anger as he declared that no monster girl could ever become a teacher. Limnoa remarked that Claudia shouldn't even consider being a teacher because she was exceptionally talented. He added that there was no way she could choose an ordinary profession, but advised she to aspire to a higher profession like the king officer. Washio interrupted, telling Limnoa to respect the student's decision of profession. Upon hearing this, Limnoa lost it, telling Washio to shut his filthy mouth and saying Claudia being a teacher was a great loss to the entire world. Limnoa immediately grabbed onto his Washio's tie, telling him that, as teachers, they couldn't stand and watch that happen. Limnoa pointed out that as the only rank teacher in the academy, he should be the one in charge of the monster girl, and not his talentless virgin. While still grabbing hold of the tie, Limnoa instructed Claudia to apply for a change of teacher immediately and submit the request to the director that same day. However, at that moment, Limnoa felt something caressing her face like the Grim Reaper was licking her face, scaring the of her. It turned out to be Claudia's tentacles, and as Limnoa turned, Claudia loudly warned him to leave Washio alone. Claudia pointed out that Washio had always supported her dreams and was the best teacher in the world. Putting a finger over her mouth, Claudia revealed that when she hated herself for being worthless, Washio had advised her to know herself. Angrily, Limnoa remarked that those words, "know thyself," made no sense. But Claudia told him that his face being that ugly made no sense. Insert meme, that one was a violation. At that moment, Washio instantly had a flashback of years ago when Claudia was just his little octopus and was eager to transform into a girl so she could clap him. But he lifted her to the sky and encouraged her to know herself. He had advised her never to envy others but to always look for the good within her and perfect it. He told her that if she wanted to become human, she had his support, but it should be for herself and not for anyone. Back in the present, Washio was shocked that after so many years, such a simple sentence like "know yourself" could have helped her fulfill her dreams of evolving into a monster girl. That instant, Washio and Claudia embraced each other, and Claudia pointed out that Washio was the only person in the world who could be her teacher. Hearing those words infuriated Limnoa. He immediately began to cry like a spoiled brat, while saying it would even be better if it was the former Washio, not this old waste of space that was before her eyes. However, Claudia told him that even if Washio reeked worse than expired milk at the moment, he shouldn't be written off like some piece of trash. Hearing those words, Limnoa clenched her fist and began to cry even more, shocking everyone with how written off his face was. Limnoa immediately screamed, promising Washio and Claudia they would regret making a fool of him. As the loser left, Claudia completely ignored him and asked Washio if they could get lunch. So, she grabbed Washio's hands, which made him emotional as he thought how the little octopus he had taught now wanted to become a teacher. He remembered Claudia mentioning how "know yourself" helped her. At that moment, Washio had never thought those words would return to him 20 years later. He was proud to be a teacher because of reasons like this. The next day in biology class, Washio used Claudia as a case study to explain how the monster girls could use poison and were experts at handling powerful magic. He warned the students that these monster girls possessed inhuman strength and, despite their cute appearances, were far stronger than the Incredible Hulk. At the end of the class, Washio apologized to Claudia for using her as a case study for his terrible lesson, but Claudia reassured him that she was happy to help. She moved towards him and mentioned that as long as she got to be with her sugar daddy, she was the happiest girl in the world. After that, she helped him clean the chalkboard using her long tentacles. Noticing this, Washio commented that he didn't know she could stretch her tentacles so far. Claudia explained that her tentacles were very useful because they could stretch and shrink at her will, but they were not as powerful as the long tentacle between his legs. After letting out those words, she grabbed Washio by the neck using her tentacles and revealed that her tentacles could also give deep massages. While stretching out his twiggy back like dough, Claudia informed Washio that she used to work as a masseur after they got separated years back. She then stared Washio in the eyes and told him she could give him another kind of deep massage that would sharpen the old bone of his dead sword. Without wasting a second, Claudia began to move her tentacle up his thigh, almost giving the old MC a seizure. After giving his lifeless rod some few strokes, the bad chick smiled and asked him if he was nervous. She told him she had to practice her charm, and then asked if he had enjoyed every bit of her deep massage. Nervously, Washio informed her that the next class was about to start. Although Claudia expressed her desire to spend more time with him, she had no choice but to leave the class, mentioning that she was heading off for lunch. As she left, Washio collapsed his head on the desk and felt a kind of relief because the bad chick almost collapsed the walls of his fragile heart. Meanwhile, outside the academy, a carriage arrived, and a baddie wearing a hat stepped out. She muttered to herself that she wondered if her teacher, Washio, would still remember her. Shortly afterwards, Washio stepped out of the academy excited that he was getting the rest of the day off, a privilege that only happened once a year. As he walked home in happiness, the chick wearing a hat from earlier suddenly hugged him from behind. Startled, Washio fell to the ground, stared at the chick, and demanded to know who the nutcase was. The girl said she had never expected to have changed so much that he couldn't recognize her. She then lifted her gown, revealing her spider legs, and introduced herself as the spider he had once saved, now evolved into a monster girl. Hearing this, Washio's jaw dropped so far in shock that it nearly hit the ground. In the next scene, Washio took the Spider Girl to the cheapest bar in town. Upon entering the bar, Spidey Girl was thrilled, and she mentioned that it was her first time in such a classless bar. She looked to the ceiling and told Washio that she had never seen a chandelier so scrappy, it could double as a retirement home for spiders. As she sat down, Madame Web complained about how dusty the seat was, which infuriated out of the bar owner. The vexed owner then walked up to Washio, telling him he was only considerate with the whole insults because it was the first time Washio had brought such a fine chick to his bar. While they ate, the monster girl took a bite of the steak and closed her eyes as she enjoyed every bite of the tasty meat. She then commented on how dry and tasty the meat was. However, then and there, Washio had gotten enough of her rude remarks, so he called her little spider and then asked if she could stop insulting the restaurant. The Spider Girl pointed out that she was just giving her honest opinion of how the place was. Moreover, she was no longer his little spider, but was now a baddie named Aria. Upon hearing this, Washio immediately had a flashback of when Aria was just a shy spider that would hide in the corner of the classroom. Aria mentioned that those were hard times for her, but she could pull through thanks to his encouraging words. But Washio had no idea of how his words had encouraged her. Aria then asked if he was still a teacher, so Washio replied, telling her he was now a biology teacher, leaving Aria shocked. Washio explained that the times had changed, so he had no option but to change with it. After saying that, Washio told her that the small octopus in their class back then had also managed to become a monster girl and his student. However, he pointed out that his relationship with Claudia was weird because she was always glued to him. He thought that since she had changed so much physically, she would have also changed her clingy habits since she wasn't a child. Just then, Aria ordered the bar owner to bring his most expensive drink and food, zapping Washio's brain like a lightning bolt because he was more broke than a church rat. Several hours later, after eating, they stepped outside. Aria then informed Washio that she had to go because her carriage had arrived, and seeing her carriage, Washio immediately assumed the girl must be loaded. Aria then embraced him, saying she really hoped she would get to see him again, and was glad she got to see him, causing Washio to blush. They wished each other good night, and the carriage drove off. Inside the carriage, Aria was thrilled with excitement about getting to see Washio again. She smiled because she had finally achieved her life goal of hugging her teacher with human hands. However, she immediately became gloomy when she recalled Washio talking about Claudia being a monster girl also, and became super jealous. But suddenly, she glanced at a package sitting beside her and remembered she was supposed to give Washio the packaged box. In the meantime, back at the academy, Claudia just finished one of her classes and quickly rushed to the biology class to meet her broke sugar daddy. However, she was horrified when she heard that Washio had left with some beautiful chick with long dark hair. On the other hand, Aria returned to where she had left Washio to give him the package but realized he was gone. As a result, she wondered if she could go to the academy the next day to give him the package. Suddenly, her eyes widened in shock as she witnessed something horrible before her. It turned out that a church had been engulfed by fire, and the citizens were trying all they could to extinguish the fire with water, but their efforts were useless. At that moment, a nun in the church shouted that a child was still inside the burning church. Curious, Aria approached the nun, who explained that the kids in the church were playing with candles, hence the fire. Seeing the sadness in the face of the nun, Aria decided to be of help. Instantly, she charged towards the burning building. Getting inside the church, Aria was engulfed by a suffocating haze of thick, choking smoke. With that, she knew she had to hurry and save the child. To do that, she would need to use water magic, even though she was a bit rusty. Determined, she began to move inside the burning church in search of the trapped kid. That was when she heard the boy cough, and as she turned, she found him lying unconscious under the rubble. So, she immediately picked up the boy and began to move outside, but suddenly, a burning wood crashed down, blocking her path. Aria then thought about using her lightning magic, but since her magic was a bit rusty, she was scared she might destroy everything, making the issue even worse and causing more injuries to the child. This dire situation triggered memories for Aria as she remembered in the past how exceptional Washio water magic was, even better than waterbenders. Washio was practically the highest-ranking magician in the kingdom, and was popularly called the Golden Eagle. But unfortunately, he went from being the greatest magician to being the greatest and most useless biology teacher after suffering a shoulder injury. Suddenly, the citizens outside the church were amazed when they noticed that the entire building had been engulfed with water and tiny fishes were floating in it. A little girl noticed the fish in the water and then moved to get one. But that was when Aria emerged out of the water carrying the unconscious child on her back. She brought the unconscious boy to the nun, leaving the citizens both shocked and speechless. She then informed the nun that she had performed healing magic on the boy, but the doctor could also check him. The nun was grateful and thanked Aria for her heroic effort, while the crowd praised her for being beautiful and super strong. That instant, Aria sighted Washio leaving the scene in the distance. She then called out to him, and as he turned, Washio signaled her to take care of the crowd on his behalf. Aria immediately struggled to get to him, but the star-struck crowd overwhelmed her. Just then, the water engulfing the church began to recede. Sitting beside the church, the little girl watched intently as the water receded, hoping she could still catch a single fish for dinner. After waiting a while, the little girl approached Aria, asking if the fish was made from magic. Aria replied, saying that the fish was actually made from magic, scaring the out of the girl. After saying that, Aria noticed the wreath of flowers the girl wore on her head like a crown. The girl revealed that while she was sad about the destruction of the church, a man who possessed magic made a wreath of flowers for her and told her everything would be fine. With a smile, the little girl said she loved magic because it brought happiness to people. Hearing those words, Aria immediately had a flashback of when Washio had once placed a wreath of flowers on her abdomen when she was still a spider. Back then, she inquired why Washio loved to give her flowers. Pointing his finger with delight, Washio pointed out that the secret of living was giving. He went on to lecture her about the importance of giving and how when a person gave, it made them happy and the recipient happy. He told her that giving to others brought meaning to life, which was why he became a teacher. Remembering all this, Aria felt a sense of pride that Washio was her teacher, because even now that he was entirely worthless, he still managed to find a way to give to others. The following day at school, the news of the church that got burnt at the center of the town and how Aria put out the fire was buzzing everywhere. Claudia, on the other hand, was worried about the rumors spreading, but Aria, who somehow made it to the academy, assured her that it was Washio who had put out the fire. Claudia responded, telling her she thought as much because she had always known Aria's magic abilities were as useless as flat chests. Washio approached the girls, asking if they were yapping about the past. Seeing him, Aria bowed her head, thanking him for the second time for his help transforming her into a monster girl. She then offered him a gift box and said living was giving just like he had taught her. Without wasting time, Washio unwrapped the gift box, and his eyes nearly popped out in surprise. The gift was a tie, so Aria removed the old Fred Flintstone tie he had always worn and replaced it with the new tie with spiderwebs embroidered. Wearing the tie, Washio smiled in delight because he felt like a complete gentleman for the first time in his life. Sometime later, Aria arrived at the teacher's office to meet Washio. She then handed him her future career form and informed him of her decision to join the Magic Guard. Washio smiled warmly and assured her he would do everything he could to support her chosen career path. Moved by his encouragement, Aria leaned in and hugged him tightly. While sitting alone in the office, Washio thought about his girls and how he would have to do everything possible to help them achieve their goals in the future. Just then, he overheard two random students arguing seriously about whose faction would win the upcoming spring battle. He thought Limnoa's group would most likely win the faction battle since they'd been undefeated for 5 years. However, that wasn't his concern. Meanwhile, sitting on the fountain outside the school, Claudia was shocked that Aria, who had always been getting angry and biting others back then, wanted to join the Magic Guard to help others now. Aria replied, saying she bit others because Claudia had a freaking habit of bringing worms to class, and she was always disgusted. Aria then asked Claudia about her plans for the future. Claudia responded by telling her she wanted to become a teacher just like Washio because she liked the idea of humans and monsters studying together. Just then, 3 ugly goons, led by a femboy with a Karen haircut, swaggered over and asked the girls to join their faction. Claudia and Aria stared in confusion at what the idiots were yapping about. The femboy then introduced himself as Frederick, a second-year student and a core member of the Limnoa faction. Frederick and his lackeys then informed the girls that their faction was a type of magic study group concerned primarily with studying magic invocation. Hearing this, the girls were confused about whether to join, while the Karen haircut dude continued to persuade them to join, saying it would be fun. He even promised to make them 1,000 times stronger and help them shine brighter. Even so, Claudia declined to join their moronic group, and told him to go find a lake to drown himself. Aria also declined, saying she hated gatherings and, even worse, the gatherings of dumbasses. Angered by those words, Frederick challenged the girls to a duel, saying the winner was the first to hit the other with magic. Claudia tried telling him to give up already, but the guy was far gone in his determination to prove he was an alpha male. He immediately cast a spell summoning a wave of water, and before he could blast the girls with it, Claudia turned and neutralized it effortlessly. Seeing this, Frederick smiled and said he was just testing their powers. But Claudia said he should have tested if his brain was intact instead. With that, Frederick said he would have to motivate them a little bit, and in the blink of an eye, the guy summoned a ferocious werewolf. He explained that the werewolf represented his magical power, which would manifest naturally according to the rank of his magical ability. Frederick revealed that the manifestation of the magical power was known as the image of magic power. After saying that, he smugly asked if the girls were impressed and pointed out that according to Limnoa's teachings, the creatures they manifest are a reflection of the user's spirit. These representations could be in the form of a beast or magical creatures. However, the larger the size of this representation, the stronger the user's magical abilities. The power of the user could be known just by looking at their invocations. Looking at Frederick's invocation, the rest of the students were awestruck at the strength and size of his werewolf. However, Aria and Claudia were hardly impressed and concluded that judging by the size of his invocation, his magic abilities should be a rank C or rank B. With a smile, Frederick warned them not to jump to conclusions just yet. Without wasting a minute, the guy went ahead to summon a giant ice knife from the firmaments of the heavens that almost impaled the girls but shattered the ground. With that, he smiled and asked the girls if they were now impressed. Touching his hair smugly like Prince Charming, he told the girls that his spell reciting was perfect, and that was what made his magic remarkable, like an rank magician. He assured the girls that Limnoa, the supervisor of their faction, could triple their powers just by reciting spells. With that, he stretched his hands like he was about to propose marriage and then asked the girls to join his faction. The girls stared at his arrogant, ugly face and were clearly disappointed. they began to compare his werewolf invocation to the ripped monster Gigachad Washio could invoke on a good day. So, in conclusion, Claudia told him to go piss himself and said they would rather stick with Washio to the end. Upon hearing this, Frederick placed his hand on his chin and said he never expected them to choose the old, boring teacher over him. This statement pissed the hell out of the girls. However, the douche went on to say that even though they owed the old loser a favor, that shouldn't be enough reason to choose him. Frederick added that according to what Lim Noah told him, she and the dirt graduated the same year. While she became an A-rank magician, Washio remained a lowly E-rank. As soon as he let out those words, a magical blast immediately destroyed the tower behind him. It turned out that Claudia had fired an energy blast at him that accidentally hit the tower, and then she instantly unleashed her powerful tentacles, asking how dare he make fun of Washio. Seeing this, the rest of the students were scared for their lives, while Aria advised Claudia to learn how to control her anger. After saying that, Aria unleashed her massive, powerful spider legs and summoned a giant skull-faced monster, towering over them menacingly as she demanded that Frederick apologize immediately. Seeing this overwhelming sight, Frederick's eyes widened in sheer terror, and he immediately wet his pants in utter panic. On the other hand, the monster girls continued to demand that he apologized for the insults he had rained on their daddy. However, Frederick was still amazed at the sight before his very eyes, so Aria yelled at him to apologize quickly. Meanwhile, the rest of the students were still stunned that the school's library was destroyed by just a single attack from the monster girls. Suddenly, Lim Noah and Washio rushed to the scene, demanding to know what had caused the massive explosion. Staring at where the library used to be, the teachers realized the library tower had been reduced to shambles. Annoyed, Lim Noah demanded to know who the student responsible for such a disaster was. That moment, Claudia pointed a finger at Frederick, saying the Buffin had started it first. Meanwhile, out of nowhere, Frederick dropped to his knees, grabbed Claudia's hand, and, with wide, desperate eyes, declared his love for her, leaving everyone utterly stunned. He mentioned that it was the first time he had seen such explosive magic, and he found her an incredible creature. Still holding on to her hand, Frederick pointed out that even though Claudia was putting on a limiting ring on her finger that prevented her from releasing her full power, she still managed to unleash such a powerful attack. Blushing hard, the hopeless simp said he had never felt such an intense feeling before and suspected it must be love. He dropped a bombshell, asking Claudia to be his wife, but the girl was horrified to hear those words. She immediately yanked her hand away from his, declaring with a sharp tone that she would never marry someone with such a horrible face. At the same time, Lim Noah smirked and remarked to Washio that he was clearly doing a job as the one in charge of the girls, letting things escalate to the point where they destroyed the library tower. Embarrassed, Washio told her the girls must have had a good reason for destroying the tower. However, he promised to be stricter with them from then on. Placing her hand on his shoulder, Lim Noah told him that if it was too much of a job to care for the monster girls, he would be more than happy to take care of them on his behalf. However, Washio began to leave with the girls and told his worthless to take care of his bad breath instead. Later that day, at the counselor's office, Frederick handed an apology note to Washio stating that he had initially provoked the girls. He remarked that he had reflected on his actions and realized that his actions were reckless. However, he proudly boasted that Lim Noah was in charge of him and would cover the cost of destroying the tower. After saying that, he turned to Claudia, grabbing her chin and declaring that he would surely get her and free her from the brainwashing she had received from the dirty old man, hinting at Washio. But Claudia angrily told him to go hang himself. With that, he turned to Aria and said he had never been attracted to girls that looked like men. However, he stretched his hands, saying he would be considerate, and then asked her to join his faction. Pissed, Aria told him she was irritated by his presence and would send him to his grave as a living sacrifice if he continued to pester her. As Frederick left the room, Washio casually remarked that the young man was obviously deeply in love. However, this statement pissed the girls off, but he tried explaining that since they were of the same age, they would make a good couple, unlike an old man like him. Suddenly, Claudia's supersized melons were all up in his face. Standing over him, Claudia angrily said she hated that he didn't care how much his words hurt her, and then told him they would definitely have a date after the end of his class. A few minutes later, Washio scolded the girls, warning them not to use magic outside of the class, and they were remorseful about their reckless actions. Standing up from the chair, Claudia pointed out that she was heading to her afternoon class and reminded Washio of their date, making the old man blush redder than a tomato. After class that day, in the female dorm, Claudia tried on a couple of dresses for her date with Washio, and was complimented by two random girls that she looked very cute. Before long, Washio arrived at the girls' room to take them on the date, and was first welcomed by Claudia's XXL melons that left him frozen in shock. However, he complimented Claudia on how cute she looked. Just then, Aria appeared and demanded a compliment from him, so Washio smiled and told both girls that they looked beautiful. Meanwhile, the random nosy girls began gossiping about Washio, calling him a useless E-rank teacher who couldn't handle his role as the girls' instructor. Their whispers didn't go unnoticed, as both Aria and Claudia overheard every word. Shortly after, while on the date, Claudia offered to hand-feed Washio some sweets. Still, he politely declined, saying he was already full. Suddenly an old, bald, drunk fart stumbled over to Washio, placing his hands on his shoulders, and then asked what he was up to. Seeing the girls, the old drunk smiled, saying it was cute that Washio was having fun with his students. The old baldy then told Washio that, now that he had such cute students, he should aim for a promotion instead of settling for his current level E rank. The old man then asked if Washio wasn't depressed with the fact that Limnoa was now of a higher rank than him. While Washio and the old man discussed, the girls sat nearby, overhearing the entire conversation. At the same time, with a smile on his face, Washio assured the old, nosy fart that being an E-rank teacher with little responsibilities suited him just fine. Washio added that he would have been eager for a promotion if he was younger. Hearing all this, the girls were greatly concerned that everyone underestimated Washio, not only Frederick and Limnoa, but the entire townspeople. So Claudia mentioned that she had an idea, and Aria immediately followed up, claiming that she had one too. So, while the old potbelly continued insisting that Washio focus on getting a promotion, the girls began to excuse themselves. They told Washio they had an urgent matter to attend to and promised to reschedule the date for another time, leaving him confused. Later that evening, while eating at the cafeteria, Washio noticed that the girls didn't have dinner, and he couldn't see their presence in the cafeteria. Suddenly, Aria approached him, holding a piece of paper, and asked him to sign it. Washio demanded to know what it was. Aria revealed that it was a document to establish his faction, the Washio faction, to show everyone just how amazing he was. Banging his head on the desk, Washio informed Aria that there was a problem. He revealed that he wasn't allowed to have his own faction as an E-rank teacher in the academy. However, Aria schooled the clueless oldie on the requirements of creating a faction. She explained to him that, according to the director, the faction had to be established using the raising ring as the core method of magic. She added that they would also need at least 3 students for the faction, and Claudia was already managing the student enrollment process. Lastly, she told him that he would need to be a D-rank teacher, and starting from that moment on, he had already been promoted by the director. Placing his hand on his cheek, Washio wondered why, for over 20 years, the hobbit of a director had suddenly decided to promote him to a D-rank teacher. Aria mentioned that she had threatened to leave the academy if the faction wasn't created, so the director had no option but to oblige. With everything settled, she asked Washio to hurry and sign the document. Still, Washio encouraged her to join an existing faction instead of creating a new one. He advised her to interact more with other students and learn magic instead of worrying about a sick old man like him. Washio even added that she could join the Limnoa faction since Frederick had enthusiastically invited her from the get-go. Hearing this, Aria's expression changed immediately from cute to an "I'm gonna bite your head off" kind of face. Seeing this expression, Washio nearly entered nirvana. On the other hand, Aria remarked that Washio was amazing both as a teacher and a magician. However, she suddenly burst into tears, lamenting that he constantly frustrated her efforts. So, Washio immediately apologized and said he would sign the document immediately. As he moved to sign, Claudia burst into the scene, shouting his name and handing him a letter from the landlord. Reading the letter, Washio discovered he was being evicted from his shack because the old hag had transferred the property to her son. According to his new landlord, Washio's filthy existence was no longer wanted on the premises. Placing his hand over his head, Washio thought deeply about his predicament, knowing that from the next day, he wouldn't only be a broke, he would also be a homeless hobo as well. That moment, Claudia bowed to him and pleaded that he accepted the offer of creating a faction so he would at least get a dorm in the academy to sleep. With no choice whatsoever, Washio signed the document to be the supervisor of the newly created faction. Meanwhile, elsewhere, in a high-rise tower, a pretty chick was lying unconscious inside a cryogenic chamber. Back to the MC, after signing the document, He and the girls headed to the director's office for the final approval. However, the Smeagol denied their proposal to create a new faction. Instantly, Claudia became furious and demanded to know why their proposal was being denied. With a look of total shock, they were informed that the raising ring method of magic already existed. According to how things were, the Limnoa faction used the vocal summoning method of magic. The Julius faction used summoning with rings, while the Alba faction used magic with incense. Feeling disappointed, Washio and the girls left the director's office while Washio pondered deeply, searching for another solution. He knew he had to find another way to create a new faction so he could get a dorm, or else he would be thrown out to the street like homeless scum. That moment, he thought of begging the new landlord to let him stay. Suddenly, the ever-annoying Jane made a dramatic entrance, shamelessly calling Claudia honey, much to the disgust of the girls. He immediately grabbed Claudia by the waist, asking for a kiss, but she shoved his ugly face to the side. Turning to Washio, Frederick announced that he had a message for him from Limnoa. Frederick then informed Washio that the library tower Claudia had destroyed earlier contained a magic reactor that belonged to the Limnoa faction, and that it had been destroyed in the process as well. So, since his students' recklessness destroyed the tower and reactor, Limnoa had instructed Washio to head to the ghost tower to retrieve a new reactor. Frederick also mentioned that the ghost tower was crawling with real ghosts, scaring out of Claudia. On the other hand, Aria showed no fear whatsoever, excited to embark on the adventure, but Washio was already sweating out all his body fluid from intense fright. Shortly afterwards, the team finally arrived at the ghost tower with Washio sweating bullets and gripping tightly to a pillar, scared as hell. Upon entering the tower, he instructed the girls to move quickly and retrieve the reactor so they could leave as soon as possible. At the same time, somewhere inside the ghost tower, Shiny Shitstain reported to Limnoa that he had delivered the message to the old vulture and the monster girls. Limnoa then thanked him for his useless efforts. So, he inquired if, once the plan succeeded, Claudia, his self-proclaimed babe, would finally join their faction. Limnoa then assured him that if the plan to scare the old, filthy man with the ghosts successfully worked, and she dramatically saved the girls like a true ghostbuster, then the monster girls would have no choice but to see how useless Washio was. They'd be freed from the old donkey's brainwashing and, with no other option, would have to join their faction. Making a low-budget illuminating symbol with their hands, Limnoa and Frederick proudly stated the principles of their faction, using intelligence to get what they wanted and, ultimately, to amass wealth. Laughing like true villains, they eagerly awaited the arrival of the monster girls. With a confident smirk, Limnoa was certain that she would soon be in charge of the girls, and everything would finally return to how it was meant to be from the beginning. Entering deep inside the ghost tower, the girls were frightened, so they clung tightly to Washio's hands. Suddenly, they noticed a door moved slightly with a creak that almost gave them a heart attack. Out of nowhere, a gluey image of a ghost appeared, giving them the greatest scare of their miserable lives. So, without waiting for approval, Washio and Claudia ran faster than their shadows, leaving Spidey Girl behind. While running, they accidentally dropped inside a trap door and fell faster than the pull of gravity. Aria tried saving them with her spider web, but she was just so useless. So, Washio and Claudia smashed to the ground harder than I smashed your mom last night. Just then, Claudia decided it was the perfect opportunity to develop some massive plot with Washio's old wood. Licking her tongue like a freak, she began to strip, exposing her cleavage. Washio begged for her to calm down, but she pressed her super-size melons hard against his chest and then moved to lip-clap him for starters. However, at that moment, the 18+ rated scene was disrupted by a bright light that emanated from the cryogenic pill. Smashing the computer angrily, suddenly, Washio sighted the capsule housing an android girl with zero magic power, and to make matters worse, it was set to explode in just 60 seconds. Frightened, Washio informed Mrs. Plot that they needed to leave immediately. With the timer counting down, Claudia pointed out that leaving would be impossible because they were trapped inside. They immediately tried opening the locked door, but their efforts were as worthless as Washio's face. Suddenly, a voice blared from the capsule, announcing that self-destruct would be activated in 60 seconds. With the timer still counting down, Washio's 2 brain cells finally clicked, and he moved to read the capsule's instructional manual. Just then, his eyes widened in utter disbelief when he discovered a magic book. He frantically flipped through the book, searching for any clue to deactivate the self-destruct. But at first, he couldn't wrap his head around the strange and convoluted language the manual was written in. Finally, he was able to read a portion of it. So with a timer at 46, Washio approached the capsule like a true protagonist. He placed his hand on the capsule and silently cast a spell, instantly summoning his ripped, monster-headed invocation in a burst of raw power. Instantly, a whirlwind filled the place, and a mighty surge of electricity emanated from the capsule, and suddenly the timer stopped. Overjoyed, Claudia couldn't contain her excitement, showering Washio with praise as she called him her amazing master, and repeatedly referred to him by his old nickname, the Golden Eagle. Pointing at the magic book, she asked what was written inside. Opening the book's pages, Washio revealed that it was an ancient artifact containing many lost spells. With that, Claudia suggested they use the book as the study object in case the Washio faction was finally approved. Suddenly, the android Aurora woke from her many years of deep slumber and opened the capsule, leaving Washio and Claudia in shock. The machine girl immediately began asking for her master, but Washio told her he had no idea about the master she had mentioned. However, the girl apologized for sleeping so long and said she was ready to resume the master's research. So, Washio then showed her the magic book, and the girl said her master had written the book. With sadness, the mecha chick mentioned that she was too weak to keep using magic, and that since her master had gone to the great beyond, she would want Washio to add new pages to the book. Staring at the paper with sorrowful eyes, she pointed out that it was her master's mission. After saying that, she began to return inside the capsule. However, before she entered the capsule, she thanked Washio and Claudia for showing her the paper one last time, and then informed them that she would unlock the doors so they could leave. Lying inside the capsule, the chick stated that if her master was no more, then there was no reason for her to exist, and it was best she returned to sleep until her master returned. With that, Washio turned to leave, but Claudia stopped him, pleading for him to become the android girl's new master. She told him he was a remarkable magician, but Washio immediately stopped her, saying he couldn't because he was just some poor biology teacher. Watching him leave, Claudia asked if he was really going to leave the girl behind. Upon hearing those words, Washio's mind flashed back to what he had read in the magic book. The book revealed that it was one of the 7 ancient artifacts, and its former master had written that the Aurora robot was the book's guardian. For generations, the book had been entrusted to those deemed capable, individuals known as the administrators. Back in the past, it was revealed that the former master couldn't continue with the project due to low magical powers. Even though it was a very tough decision, she was forced to abandon the humanoid and pass the magic book to the next master. However, Washio wasn't ready to take on such a huge responsibility and would rather remain a worthless biology teacher. On the other hand, Claudia was greatly worried and was strongly against leaving the Alexa 2.0 with Sass behind. She turned back, stared at the Robobee, and then insisted that Washio join her in his harem. Looking at her, Washio remarked that he had enough crazy chicks in his harem already and didn't need more. However, Claudia grabbed his hand and said she had no idea what might have happened to him since they parted ways for him to be so cold-hearted. But she believed he was still the kind man who loved helping others. On hearing those words, Washio started thinking with all his brain, and then told Claudia that one day he would definitely tell her the reasons behind his cold-heartedness. After saying that, Washio returned to the capsule, gazed at the bot girl, and then declared that she had a heart and surely deserved a master. Holding her hand, Claudia asked him to give her a name. So, as the robot opened her eyes, Washio named her Alice and invited her to leave with him. That moment, Alice stared at Washio in surprise. So, Washio informed her that her name onwards was Alice, and he was now her new master. Excited, Claudia immediately grabbed Washio's hand and said he was their new daddy. With that, Alice remarked that she would update her system, making Washio her new master. Before long, Washio returned to the academy with his new unlocked Robochick. He then recounted everything that had happened at the ghost tower to Limnoa. Hearing all that had happened, Limnoa's jaw nearly dropped to the floor as she thought that instead of returning with a new magic reactor, the old man had returned with a new girl. However, she tried acting cool, saying that as a Ranka professor, she had always known the magic book was down at the ghost tower and that the automaton was also there, ignoring her like an annoying pest. Claudia asked the principal if they could make the magic book the research subject for Washio's faction. The principal then asked if Washio could handle the faction. Washio responded by pointing at his girls and saying that he could handle the faction with the help of his exceptional students. However, Alice, being the sassy robot, corrected him, saying she was not his student and then gave him the peace sign. So, with that, The rat principal approved the formation of the Washio's faction and informed the members that their new residence would be the Ghost Tower. Hearing this, the team was dejected, but Aria assured them that while they left her behind earlier, she chatted with the resident ghost, and she turned out to be a friendly ghost, just like Casper. Moving on, Washio asked the girls to shop for some clothes for Alice before bidding them farewell, explaining that he would be occupied with the paperwork for the Ghost Tower repairs. So the girls went shopping for clothes for Alice, while Washio handled the repairs of the destroyed Ghost Tower. After the shopping, the girls joined Washio at the site of repair with Alice now dressed in a maid outfit. Alice mentioned that she had picked the most suitable outfit to serve Washio well as her new master. The girls then asked Washio if Alice was looking hot, and Washio couldn't help but agree, which made Alice blush. Claudia and Aria immediately called her out on her blushing, but Alice denied it immediately, saying robots didn't have the capacity to blush. On the other hand, Washio instructed the girls to move away from the site for the ongoing construction, but the girls insisted on helping with the repairs. Staring at the cemented blocks, Alice activated the laser blaster from her hand, explaining that she had anticipated a falling rock. She then pulverized the incoming rock to smithereens before it could cause any lethal damage. She then mentioned that she had eliminated the threat while everyone was frozen in shock at what they had just witnessed. After that, Alice grabbed Washio by the face, asking if he was fine. Washio smiled because he could see how affectionate the android girl had become towards him. Arriving home later that day, Washio met his old landlady, who reminded him that he was no longer a tenant on her property and then asked him to take his ugly face from her sight. Sad and depressed with nowhere to go, the girls suggested Washio stayed at an inn till the tower's repairs were completed. However, Washio reminded them he was still a broke church rat who couldn't afford a dime to pay for a room. With that, Claudia suggested he stay in her room since he had no friends to stay with. Before Washio could decline, Aria chimed in, demanding he stay in her room instead and promised to indulge him in all the plot styles in the world. Still, Washio declined, saying it was inappropriate for a teacher to stay in a student's room. Grabbing him by the waist, Claudia asked if he was refusing because he was nervous something bad would happen. She then remarked that they could sleep on the same bed and do all sorts of unimaginable things, leaving Washio's brain totally fried. Even so, Washio screamed at her to stop filling his head with cultured thoughts. But these girls were on a mission to cream his sausage by all means. Aria also leaned close, saying she wouldn't mind if his massive old wood destroyed her floodgates. At that moment, Washio had gotten enough. He told the girls he was popular and had friends who would be more than happy to have him at their crib. So, hours later, they approached Limnoa, who refused at the spot to accommodate Washio's dirt and his shank. Washio pleaded with him to reconsider for the sake of their old classmate bond. But Limnoa declined, stating that even though they were classmates, they were completely in different ranks. Pointing at him, Limnoa reminded Washio that he was a rank A teacher while Washio was a rank E teacher, and just being in the same space with him would reduce his stees by 1,000,000. Washio then asked if he could stay at the teacher's lounge, so Limnoa replied with a smirk, telling him that he could lend him his balcony. Just as he let out those words, the girls immediately began moving Washio's king-size bed into the balcony. But that instant, Limnoa shouted that he was joking and never thought Washio would actually move in. At the same time, Aria said she would never allow Washio to stay on a balcony. At that point, Claudia remarked that the only option left was for Washio to choose which girls' rooms he would stay in. Despite this, Washio firmly told them he would never consider staying in their rooms. Just then, Alice raised her copper hands, startling everyone. Soon after, Washio moved into the tower under repairs and settled in with Alice in her underground chamber, where her capsule was kept. Later that night, Washio bid Alice good night, and as he slept on the bed, she slept on her capsule. While sleeping, Washio had a terrible nightmare and was sweating profusely. Noticing this, Alice decided to place his head on her flat motherboards. Soon, Washio woke up to find himself in such a sus position, so he screamed, asking what was going on. Alice replied, telling him that he was having a nightmare, so she decided that hugging him would help calm him down. Washio told her he was fine now, and she could let go. But Alice insisted on torturing him with her flat plots even more. However, Washio pointed out that she was freaking strong, and he couldn't even move his head. Nevertheless, Alice continued to wrap his head in her embrace, telling him everything was fine. Closing his eyes, Washio pondered that even though the girl was flatter than a washboard, her embrace was indeed warm. He thought about how it had been ages since he'd been hugged. Even his mother had disliked hugging him because of his disgusting smell. But with Alice's embrace, he felt a sense of relief and could finally sleep peacefully for the first time in a very long while. Suddenly, Claudia and Aria appeared, and every part of their bodies was shocked to see Alice and Washio cuddling like lovers. Just then, Alice woke from her slumber, so the girls asked her if they were done developing plot or were just about to commence. Suddenly, Washio woke as well, and the girls couldn't contain their anger to yell at him, saying they were disappointed in him for refusing their fleshy plots to clap hard, flat copper. However, Washio asked them to chill, saying Alice was just an automaton and had no plot to develop. Alice chimed in, agreeing with Washio by stating that she wasn't human and was merely an automaton. However, to everyone's shock, she added, rather unexpectedly, that even though she was an automaton, she had ripe peaches waiting to be harvested. The following day at school, Claudia and Alice kept following Washio everywhere and insisted on grabbing lunch with him. The rest of the students watched in surprise at how close Washio was with the girls, but then noticed that Aria was lagging, looking pretty upset. Later that day in class, while the teacher taught, Aria pondered ways to get Washio to notice her as he did Alice and Claudia. She wondered what she could do to capture his heart, and just then, she recalled Claudia's infamous fashion sense, a shirt and tie with her cleavage boldly exposed. So, she felt Washio was more attracted to such a fashion style and then decided to give the outfit style a shot. So later that day, in Washio's office, he was frustrated because he wasn't progressing in translating the magic book. Placing his head on his desk, he thought of asking the school's linguistic professor for help. Suddenly, Aria entered his office dressed like Claudia, with her melons pointing north. She approached Washio's desk, bending down in a sus manner in an attempt to reveal her cleavage, and then asked what he was working on. Seeing Aria's seductive dressing, Washio almost had a nervous breakdown. He asked if something was wrong with her because she was acting differently from her normal self, but Aria insisted she was good and that nothing was wrong. However, still staring at her pointy melons frighteningly, he told her he was working on deciphering the magic book. But in his head, he could tell Aria was acting very strangely because Aria was not speaking in her usual form or dressed in her normal fashion. Staring at him seductively, Aria asked Washio if he was hot, and before getting an answer, she began to adjust her tie, exposing more of her cleavage. But at that moment, she noticed that instead of arousing the old man and charging his Excalibur, she was actually making him confused. She wondered what she was doing wrong, especially since she had dressed just like Claudia. So, in a desperate attempt, she suffocated him in her pillows, asking him not to overwork but to rest on her chest. In her mind, she tried imitating Alice since that was what Alice had done earlier. Washio tried telling her he was almost entering the great beyond. But that was when they suddenly noticed that the magic book's pages were flipping and also emanating very bright light. Later, Claudia and Alice entered Washio's office to hand him some books he had requested. But surprisingly, they noticed that he was not in his office. As they began to ponder where he could be, they immediately sensed he was inside the magic book with Aria facing a dangerous test. Inside the magic book, Washio and Aria were faced with the blinding light that scared the of them as they wondered where they were. From amidst the bright light, a voice announced that they would be assessed to know if they were worthy of mastering the 4 stellar spells, and if they failed, they would definitely lose their lives. That instant, they both passed out, and when they finally regained consciousness, they found themselves in a city with very thick fog. Washio asked Aria if she was okay, and she said she was fine. With that, he suggested they quickly finish up with the weird test so they could go back to their world. Placing his hand over his head, Washio mentioned that he didn't want to miss the magical presentation at the faction meeting. Suddenly, Aria noticed an eerie figure approaching and alerted Washio of its presence. It turned out to be a skeleton-like apparition wielding an axe. Shocked, Washio tried defending Aria like a top G, but he lost every shred of confidence when the monsters from both sides attacked him. Aria removed her magic limiting ring and blasted these monsters with a powerful electric bolt, completely obliterating them. Seeing this attack, Washio laughed and said he would leave the test to her since it seemed she could handle the monsters. With that, Aria went ahead to fry other approaching misty monsters with her electric bolt, instantly eliminating them. Moving on, as they ventured deeper into the world, Aria realized this was the perfect opportunity to play Adam and Eve with Washio since they were all alone in the world. She knew with the other girl's absence, this was the opportunity she had always been searching for and was determined to develop plot with Washio. So, she told Washio she was tired of walking and would love for him to carry her. Shocked to oblivion, Washio demanded what was happening because the Spidey girl had been acting weird lately. He asked if something was going on or if her pent-up hormones were disturbing her. In response, Aria told him she was fine, and all she ever wanted was for him to look at her the same way he did Octomummy and Robot Girl. Suddenly, a giant monster appeared behind Aria, about to send the thirsty girl to meet her ancestors. Still, Aria was more concerned about making a speech as she told Washio that she wanted to make his hard old wood even harder than Claudia did. However, at that moment, the monster landed a strike, so Washio immediately grabbed Aria's hand and pushed her out of the incoming attack. He then asked if she was okay, but Aria was already blushing so hard because she was so close to him. Suddenly, Washio noticed the monster preparing for a second attack. Frightened, he urged them to run, but the monster struck again before they could. Reacting instinctively, Washio lunged at Aria, diving to push her out of harm's way. He then apologized for pinning her on the ground and asked if she was fine. However, staring at him, Aria felt all kinds of ways she couldn't express with words. She then grabbed his neck, pulled him close, and then revealed that her heart was racing very fast. Washio demanded to know if she was talking about Formula 1 kind of racing. However, he explained that they had to deal with the monster before chatting about racing hearts. That instant, Aria couldn't resist asking how Washio truly saw her. Still frightened of the monster attacks, Washio pointed out that it wasn't the best time to have such chats, and they needed to deal with the intruding monster first. With that, Aria removed her magic limiting ring and created an impenetrable barrier so they could have some privacy without any interference. While inside the barrier, Washio told her she was elegant, kind, and the best at magic in her classroom. He told her that she had her unique charm, just like Claudia and Alice, and each was beautiful in their own way. Washio went on to inform her that she didn't need to mimic anyone to appear beautiful, not even Kim Kardashian. He revealed that according to a famous saying, roses were beautiful, and so were sunflowers and peonies, but they were all beautiful in their own way, just like women. Upon hearing all this, Aria's eyes widened in enlightenment. However, placing his hand on his chin, Washio said he might have mixed up the saying and didn't say it as concisely as he should. But smiling shyly, Aria told him that his lack of conciseness was a major part of his irresistible riz. After saying that, she adjusted her tie, rolled up her sleeves, and thanked Washio for returning her to her senses. She admitted that she had her unique charm and didn't need to mimic anyone else. Accomplishing his mission, Washio smiled and said even though he loved seeing her in short skirts, he would prefer things go back to how they used to be. With the issue settled, Aria disintegrated the barrier and then turned to the monster, pulverizing the of the annoying beast. After defeating the monster, Aria quickly carried Washio and began to sprint with her giant spider legs. As she bolted, she explained that it was better to use her mobility instead of taking down the monsters one after the other. On the other hand, staring up at her and being carried like a Disney princess, Washio was totally embarrassed. When Aria looked down, smiling at him, he immediately became flustered because he could tell the girl was deeply in love with him. Soon afterwards, they arrived at a giant door engraved with an Illuminati symbol. Pushing the door, Aria realized the door didn't budge and then wondered if some kind of magic was preventing the door from opening. However, Washio touched the door and loudly screamed, "Open sesame." Since nothing happened, Aria concluded the man was simply too old and dumb. But suddenly, the giant door opened, surprising both of them. Stepping inside, they found an orb glowing with a bright, blinding light. As they approached the glowing orb, Washio tried touching it. But suddenly, a white-haired girl with a snake on her head appeared behind him and ordered him to stop. Shocked, Washio tried protecting Aria and then asked the creepy girl who she was and what she wanted with them. The girl explained that she was the guardian of the magical orb and then said that if Washio wanted the magic of the orb, then he would have to defeat them. The Medusa ripoff warned Washio that he couldn't touch things without permission. However, holding her head, the girl exclaimed that she was tired of the and just couldn't continue. But the snake on her head warned her to be strong and speak up like a true guardian. After saying that, the snake turned to Washio and immediately scolded him for attempting to touch things without permission. Noticing that, Aria burst into laughter at their pathetic attempt at playing the villain. Seeing that, the snake then turned to Medusa and said they were being looked down upon and that it was time to show their true power. Without hesitation, Medusa swerved the long hair covering her face to the side, and then suddenly, her face started to shine brighter than the sun. Looking at her face, Aria immediately turned to stone. Shocked, Washio demanded to know what had happened to Aria, and Medusa explained that Aria was not dead yet, but she had turned her to stone so they could discuss it in private. She told Washo that if he wanted the orb's magic, then he would need to accept her terms. Only then would Aria's petrification be lifted, and he would get the magic he so desired. Holding Aria's shoulders, Washo asked Medusa what her terms were. Medusa revealed that she wanted Aria's feelings for him, which shocked Washo. Looking at Aria, Washo couldn't believe she had feelings for him. He thought there was absolutely no way the reaction he had been getting from her was from a place of love. Still, he inquired what would happen if he gave Medusa Aria's love for him. Medusa replied, telling him that she would break the spell and that Aria would return to normal. Still confused about what this crazy girl was talking about, the snake jumped in, saying he was a big fan of love. It explained that it fed on emotions, and then love from an innocent crush from youngins tasted better than beefsteak. The psychotic snake also mentioned that it also loved the thrill a cultured loser got from reading steamy magazines while yanking his cord at night. However, Washo had a different opinion and told the snake that the feeling of love was nothing but a joke. The snake, however, replied, calling Washo a dumb didn't know that younger girls these days often had a crush on older guys. After saying that, the snake asked Washo how he actually felt for Aria. Washo replied, saying even if Aria had the slightest feeling for him, it should just be a youthful fling and nothing serious. He added that in the long run, she would realize it was just a fleeting obsession when she finally met the right young man. The snake responded, saying indeed, but for the main time, the deal would be for him to enjoy the so-called fleeting infatuation, and then he could leave with the magic. Shortly afterwards, the faction exchange meeting's research presentation began, with Limnoa delivering a remarkable conclusion to her presentation that left the students thoroughly impressed. Just then, Washo rushed in when it was announced that it was the turn of his faction. Despite the students' low expectations for a faction led by a useless rank E teacher, Washo surprised everyone by presenting the magic book, revealing his faction had been researching lost ancient magic, leaving the students in awe. After that, Washo led the students outside the building, where the girls were already waiting for him beside a massive magical circle meticulously drawn on the ground. Seeing the gigantic circle, the students were stunned. However, Washo explained that the magic circle would be used to attract dark magic, and that it also served as a barrier to contain the dark powers. Washo said he would show them his faction search result, the 4-star meteor magic. He immediately summoned a giant, freaking ripped monster with horns and then unleashed a meteor shower into the atmosphere. Suddenly, the dark magic circle portal opened, and then the evil dragon, Capivara, was resurrected. The evil dragon immediately attacked the students, so Washo tried sending it back into the dark portal but failed. So, he attacked it with the meteor shower and instantly eliminated it. Seeing this, Limnoa was amazed that Washo obliterated the evil dragon with just a single attack. On the other hand, Washo tried explaining to the students that it wasn't supposed to go that way. However, Limnoa immediately announced to the students that Washo was only a rank E teacher and that his failure was anticipated. With that, all the students returned to the building, leaving Washo and the girls behind. Watching them leave, the girls were pissed at Limnoa for insulting their presentation. On the other hand, Aria inquired about what had happened during the test, admitting that she couldn't remember anything. Washo turned and mentioned that he also couldn't remember all the details. Meanwhile, spying on them behind a tree was Medusa, who was concerned about Washo properly handling the meteor shower magic. Hours before the presentation, Washo had declined to give Aria's love to Medusa and her snake back in the magic world. He explained that even though it was just a fleeting obsession, it was an important part of who she was, and taking it away for the sake of magic just didn't feel right. With that, Washo said he would be giving up on the magic. Back in the present, the snake told Medusa that even though the magic spell was very powerful, he did the right thing by handing it over to someone who was indeed kind, and Washo was the right person to handle the meteor shower just fine. Sometime later that day, the Academy held a faction network buffet party for the students of each faction. While the students were enjoying themselves, an ugly fatso was busy stuffing his face whole with meat. Seeing him, a random student said he was eating like a glutton even though his useless faction didn't present anything. That moment, Limnoa and Frederick entered the ballroom looking like the starboys of the occasion dressed in their favorite tuxedos. Meanwhile, a group of students noticed the absence of Washo's faction and wished they could see the monster girls. However, in the blink of an eye, Aria and Claudia arrived at the party looking like million-dollar babies. Seeing them, the simp boys couldn't stop staring, and even Frederick dropped his glass of champagne. On the other hand, Claudia tasted the beef served at the party and felt like she was in heaven. While eating, she accidentally dropped the sauce on her massive chesticles. So, she asked Washio to use his meat to clean it off. However, Washio told her she was no longer a child, so she could wipe it herself. But Alice helped wipe it off without even being asked. Staring at Claudia, Frederick approached her and started saying some useless, cringy pickup lines. However, Claudia ditched his ugly face at that moment, bolting out of the ballroom faster than Flash. At the same time, Alice brought a nice meal for Washio, so he collected the food and thanked her. However, Washio suddenly realized that everyone at the party was staring at him and gossiping about his weird habit of unlocking monster girls like they were Pokemon in his Poke deck. Just then, Aria approached Washio, asking him if he had noticed anything unusual about her appearance. But before Washio could say anything, Alice pointed out that Aria's melons had reduced by 10 centimeters. Bringing out 8 pads, Aria told Washio that she thought he liked busty girls, so she had initially added some padding to her melons, but now she was taking them off because she had decided to be herself. Upon hearing this, Alice said she would have her melons enlarged since Washio liked chicks with supersized melons. But Washio told her not to bother because her chest was hard steel and could never be modified. After saying that, Washio moved away from the crowd to the balcony to smoke cigarettes. From the balcony, he viewed the girls having fun interacting with other students and was a proud daddy. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him asking what he was doing outside, away from all the fun. It turned out to be Medusa and her snake head. Washio replied, saying he was fine, just watching the girls from a distance, and Medusa chimed in, completing his statement by saying he was alone because he was a loner and crowded places made him anxious like he would throw up. After that, Medusa asked about Alice, his female robot. Washio responded, telling her Alice was all good. Grabbing his hand, Medusa told Washio that, as guardians, they were very gullible and could be easily manipulated by people with ill intentions, which could lead to serious trouble. However, she said she was sure Washio would care for Alice and make her happy. But at that moment, Washio was already a statue. Just then, Aria and Alice walked onto the balcony and saw that their master had been petrified. Alice undid what had been done. At the same time, Claudia stormed in to meet the group and said the simp boys of the academy had been chasing her everywhere to get a taste of her cookie because it hits different. Also, Frederick burst into the scene, and upon seeing Medusa, the latest member of the Washio harem, he felt disgusted because he wasn't a fan of snakes. Meanwhile, Limnoa observed the monster girls having fun with Washio on the balcony. Suddenly, a black-haired douche approached her and said he could sense Limnoa hadn't yet given up on being the teacher of the monster girls. With a mischievous smirk, the black-haired guy asked if Limnoa wanted his help to finally become the monster girls' teacher.
Days later, the ghost tower of the Washio dormitory was finally renovated, but Washio was terrified at the possibility that there was still a ghost lurking around, even though his girls promised to protect him. Getting in, everything looked great, especially the huge bathrooms, which Claudia confessed that she had specially requested to be made big so the entire harem could fit in. Washio said that could land him in jail, but she whispered that nothing would stop her from scrubbing his back for him. However, Alice stopped her in her tracks, arguing that scrubbing Washio's back was her own job. Washio had to calm them down, and then Aria requested that they check out the rooms because she was eager to unpack. Since the rooms were spacious enough, Claudia suggested that Washio share a room with her, but Alice insisted that Washio should stay in the basement with her. After giving each other the bombastic side-eye, both girls were about to rip each other apart, with neither backing down for the other. From behind, a girl said she was going to have a single room, and she turned out to be a new girl named Mob, whom Claudia introduced as the final member of their faction to meet the minimum member count of 3. With all that had transpired between Claudia and Alice, Aria noticed everything and asked Claudia whether she was jealous of Alice while reminding her that Alice was just grok in the flesh, and there was nothing to worry about. Claudia pointed out that Alice had reproductive abilities, so Aria insisted that whether that was true or just a trick, Washio wasn't the type to be swayed by that. And besides, their real rivals were the former students of his class. Claudia remembered and acknowledged that it was true because the former students had probably all turned into monster girls already. Aria then suggested that, since they would run into them at the academy eventually, Claudia could come up with strategies other than just charm. But deep down, she knew that whoever her opponent was, she would be the one to win Washio over. After Arya had set up the bed, Claudia said the bed was a bit too big, but Arya said that that was the standard size back at her sugar daddy's house. Much later in a neighborhood, some creepy old men were bothering a waitress when a dragon girl swung by, telling them to stop hitting on the poor girl. They weren't taking her seriously until she breathed fire on their semi-bald heads, and they dashed off, calling her a monster. The waitress thanked her for saving her, and the dragon girl introduced herself as Draco from the Washio class at Ineum Academy. In the morning, Claudia woke Washio up, and the rest of the girls set him up for the day. When he arrived at school early, Limnoa was visibly shocked that Washio made it on time, so she enviously asked whether it had anything to do with Claudia and Alice. When Washio confirmed that, Lim stated that even though she didn't know how long he had been involved with the monster girls, he should be careful not to get too cozy with them. Washio stated that the things between him and those girls did look inappropriate, so Lim told him that if he was aware of it, then he should maintain a proper distance because, as an adult, he was expected to have common sense. Lim further added that with Washio's eternal E-rank brain, he would certainly not understand that kind of advice, but she would still give it to him as a courtesy. Washio was so shocked that Lim would give him any form of advice that he felt dragons were about to fall from the sky, because that was unlike her. Just then, the dark-haired guy, Julius, showed up sneakily, mentioning that the transfer student he had mentioned the other day had arrived. Washio was surprised, wondering who the transfer student was, but Julius said that he had told Lim to pass on the message. In fact, Julius was confident that the transfer student was probably someone Washio knew, and then Draco stepped forth with a glare so hard it could break a man's defenses. Julius told the girl to say hi, and Draco introduced herself as the monster girl who had helped Washio back then. Washio thought deeply, suspecting that Draco was most likely the sleepy Draco from before in his classroom. So Julius said that he had already figured that Washio would recognize Draco and had spoken to the principal, so Draco would join Washio's class. Before bidding him goodbye, Julius wished Washio luck because it seemed there would now be 3 monster girls for him to be juggling. Washio tried to start small talk because there was an awkward silence between him and Draco, so he said that he was glad to see how grown she was and that the other girls were there, so she must be feeling nostalgic. However, she only responded with some weird tongue-clicking sounds. Washio dismissed it as Gen Alpha shenanigans, and then they walked in more awkward silence. Much later, Claudia bumped into Draco and was all touchy-feely with her, and Draco blushed hard, warning Claudia to stop being a clinger. However, Claudia said she couldn't help herself, considering how massive Draco was, while Draco said that Claudia was pretty big herself. As soft elements clashed against each other, Washio preserved his sanity by turning away from that dangerous sight. In any case, both girls said they were happy to meet each other again and should work hard in their studies. But right outside the classroom was Julius, who seemed to be up to no good with a sinister look on his face. Later, Washio delivered a lecture teaching his students how monsters had their own food chains and how dragons were at the very top of the food chain. One of the students said learning about dragons made the biology class peak because dragons were so cool, and he found it to be absolutely romantic. His colleague said that an A-rank monster like a chimera could easily be eaten by dragons, and that freaked him out. With that, both guys turned to look at Draco, who was fast asleep, as they both wondered whether she also ate chimeras. When she later got up, her expression was mostly fire, which made the boys even more excited. While Julius was still delivering the lecture, Draco asked him to explain what exactly a monster was, but her classmates were quite surprised because that was the barest minimum and the most basic knowledge. The girl confessed that it was her fault for not knowing the basics because she had been snoring through class and couldn't remember a thing, and as such, Washio would have to explain from scratch. Sounding exasperated, he re-explained that a monster was a general term for creatures that suddenly appeared. 100 years ago, creatures thought to be imaginary, like slimes and dragons, were suddenly observed all over the world during an event known as the Great Dark Night. Basically, monsters had lower intellect than humans, but had developed their own social structures. Among themselves, they admired those with greater abilities and referred to the top monster among them as the Demon King. Washio concluded by saying that someone else would teach them about the Demon King at the Great Dark Night in history class, and so they could ask more questions there. Draco said that she accepted that monsters were suddenly appearing creatures, but that they should stop calling monsters dumb. With that, she leapt from her seat, plunging towards Washio as she pointed out that calling monsters dumb was disrespectful to them. Poor Washio was trying not to piss his pants, but Draco smirked playfully at him, completely disarming him and saying she was just kidding and he had totally freaked out like some lame old fool. The entire class was terrified because Draco's dragon presence was intense and her wings were massive. A lot of them cowered in fear and trembled while Washio, who was barely trying to hold himself together, concluded the class lessons for the day. In fact, when he saw her with some weird tongue-out expression on her face, he realized she might be a handful, even worse to handle than Claudia and Arya. Just then, Arya rushed in, telling Washio that Claudia was sick. He rushed to the nurse's office and found that one of Claudia's tentacles had been ripped off during an explosion in their alchemy class. She said her tentacles would regenerate and turn out just fine and apologized to Washio, but he told her to apologize to her classmates instead. However, Claudia said that she might get expelled, and Washio was shocked. While he was still attending to her, Draco was lurking in the corners, texting some guy that they had been making good progress thus far and should move on to the next phase of their plan. On the other hand, Arya told Claudia that she wasn't getting expelled, and the girl seemed relieved, so Arya confirmed whether she was wounded anywhere. The nurse stated that since Claudia was injured, she could take the afternoon classes off, but should ensure to submit a written reflection the following day. On the way out, Arya asked Claudia whether she was struggling with a bit of alchemy, and Claudia said she had wanted to talk about it. Arya then said that it seemed Claudia was a little off. Apparently, she was seated next to her during the lesson, and while Claudia had made some minor mistakes, nothing was critical at first, until Claudia started zoning out. Washio asked if that meant that Claudia had lost focus, but Arya said it wasn't quite how it seemed. Still, Washio said that this time it was an accident, but it was still the same Claudia who wrecked that tower before, and if she screwed up again, a written apology might not cut it. Arya really thought deeply, wondering if Claudia was just distracted, because the vibe she had gotten earlier seemed way different. Later that night, Washio was summoned to a meeting with the school head and Julius, and the school principal asked him if he knew why he was there. Washio had an idea and asked if it was about what happened with Claudia the other day. So Julius confirmed that he was right, and as the alchemy instructor, he was also responsible, but Washio was also there, and they should be arriving any minute. Just then, an angry father stormed in demanding to see and to know who Washio was, and when he spotted him, he accused Washio of burning his daughter's face out of all the more hideous parts of her body he could have burnt. The poor principal tried to calm the angry father down, but the man said there was no way he could calm down because the person who caused the injury wasn't even present, and he wanted to see that person immediately. In fact, the angry father said there was no need to call Claudia, and if he saw her, he would punch her in the face himself. He jerked Washio up by the collar, and Washio tried his best to apologize while Julius bowed pretentiously, saying the accident during the alchemy class was entirely his responsibility as the instructor. This didn't seem to pacify the father, who said Julius was indeed going to take responsibility for what happened to his daughter. A lady said the real issue existed between the monster girl and Washio, and then the president of the Parent-Teacher Association said she would just get straight to the point and demand Washio's dismissal. Washio was shocked as the woman said she had received some information earlier. Meanwhile, Mob was excited that Claudia's legs had already healed, and Claudia said it was all thanks to her self-regeneration abilities. She asked Arya whether she could also regenerate, but Arya said she couldn't, and even without regeneration, she could heal things unlike Claudia. Somehow, though, while they were walking through class, things seemed strange, and their schoolmates were whispering, making petty side talks. One guy confronted Claudia, saying he felt Claudia had deliberately created the explosion incident, and it wasn't a mistake. But Claudia defiantly said it wasn't on purpose, and the student said that he had heard that Washio once blew up a monster protection facility. The girls looked shocked to hear that, So the rowdy idiot said that only made them look guilty, and they were all accomplices to Washio, who was a criminal. It turned out that the letter the woman heading the Parents-Teachers Association had brought divulged some information about Washio. That information stated that Washio once brutally murdered the staff at a monster protection facility and then abducted and brainwashed the young monsters. Although the letter was sent anonymously, the angry adults said they couldn't brush it off as a prank and would have to investigate Washio's background, and depending on the results, he would be dismissed. In fact, the worst punishment he would have would be a suspension. Julius turned, asking Washio if it was true. But the moment he was about to open his mouth, some strange thing happened and the entire building was thrown into chaos, breaking from all sides. It was all Arya's doing, who had now transformed into her monster form, saying that no one knew what the monster girls had gone through because they had suffered and Washio was the only one who helped them. Mop tried stopping Arya, wondering what had overtaken her, but it seemed Claudia was also not herself and under some sort of spell. The students got about whispering among themselves and wondering whether monster girls would be getting upset at anything related to Washio because now people were scared and unaware of when the monster girls would attack. In fact, some of the students said they no longer wanted to take lessons in the same class with those girls. Following the entire happenings of that day, the Parent-Teacher Association president said that punishing Washio wouldn't be enough, and she was requesting disciplinary action against Claudia, Arya, and Washio since he was their home teacher. As a punishment, the principal placed Washio and the monster girls under house arrest in their rooms until the investigation was complete, and they were instructed not to leave the Washio faction dormitory under any circumstances. Word spread around school about Washio and the monster girls, with some of the students speculating that the monster girls were the victims who had been brainwashed from when they were younger, while blaming Washio, calling him a creepy old guy. Meanwhile, Julius was quite impressed with himself and told Lim that once the results of the background check came in, they would have Washio step down, and Julius would recommend Lim to take over as the whole-world teacher for the monster girls by saying that only an A-rank teacher could properly educate the girls. Despite hearing this, it seemed Lim wasn't fully satisfied, so Julius asked her if she had an issue with it. And so, Lim said that her request was simply to change the homeroom teacher for the monster girls from Washio to herself, not to force Washio out of his position, let alone spread malicious rumors about him. Because Lim thought it had gone too far, Julius was surprised, saying he didn't expect her to care about such a matter. In any case, Lim told Julius to avoid recklessly involving students in future plans because they were teachers and should act responsibly. Julius nonchalantly said that Lim agreed to Washio's downfall, yet she was being such a selfish bomb, acting like a typical elf who was selfish. While criticizing Lim, he asked Draco what she thought, but the girl kept silent. Eventually, she spoke up, saying students had already spread the rumors and everyone was trash-talking Washio everywhere in school. After that, Julius commended her on a job well done and told her to keep spreading the news outside the school grounds. The girl gritted her teeth in frustration, but gave him absolutely no response after that. Pissed off, Julius called her an ill-mannered brat, who made it even clearer that Washio was unfit to be an educator. As he drew closer to her face, Draco asked Julius whether he hated Washio or the monster girls, but he told her it was such a pointless question to ask. In return, he asked her what the most beautiful emotion was, and said it was neither love nor hope but despair, because he enjoyed seeing the light fade from people's eyes and them lose all hope to sink into despair. While placing his hands around Draco, he asked her if she felt the same way, but she told him that his stories were always based on his delusions powered by crack. However, he said he knew she would never understand, because fools like her never would. At the Washio faction, Washio was obviously depressed following the events that happened. So Alice brought him tea made with hot milk and honey, saying both milk and honey contained an element that helped produce serotonin, which had calming effects on the mind. Medusa told her to shut up because she had no idea what she said, and a grown man like Washio should not be sulking, but rather sharing his problem so they would solve it for him. However, Washio remained indifferent and said nothing about it. Alice knelt close to him, asking him if he would be willing to share his past with her someday, and he said that maybe someday it would happen. She accepted his choice and bid him good night, while Washio remained in a sad mood, thinking deeply about how it all started. One day, when he woke up, he was surrounded by a bunch of strangers celebrating that they had successfully summoned him as a hero from another world. He assumed it was a prank or some folks with wardrobe malfunctions, identifying as cosplayers, until a female among them addressed him as a hero, saying they had been longing to meet him, and he should tell them his name. He introduced himself as Washio, and the lady told him that he should help rescue their country. Washio saved them from the clutches of monsters and led them to victory. While Washio was still in dreamland, the girls all huddled together, seeing that Washio and Claudia had been holed up in their room for a day, and Washio was totally sulking. Aria was obviously depressed, so Alice asked her to share what she knew about Washio's past. And so Alice narrated that when she first met the man, Washio was known as the Golden Eagle and the highest-ranking mage summoned from another world. He had apparently saved her life on the battlefield when she was a dying monster and was her own savior. The humans in that country were terrified of a lion-headed, snake-tailed beast. And as such, they believed that was why Washio had been successfully summoned, so he could defeat her. Washio told them he could absolutely not do it because he was just a regular salaryman with zero combat experience. He asked them to send him back to Japan because if he missed a day of work, he would get an earful from his boss. But one dude said their kingdom, Prodizio, had been under attack by monsters for the past 5 years, and fighting the monsters only made things worse. And that was why they summoned someone with immense magical power to grant them favor during the battle, which was why Washio was summoned. They further explained that he would learn as many spells as possible and lead the frontlines to help them reclaim the territories occupied by the monsters while wiping them out. Leaving him with the monster, they said they had high expectations of him, and when he retired to his room, Washio realized that none of that was a joke, and indeed, they were expecting an ordinary salaried man like him to pull off something so insane. He told himself there was no point in being pessimistic, since he couldn't change what had happened, and following the proverb that said one should live each day as if their life had just begun, he decided he would make it work in that other world. He was served tea by a young man named Scara, who was a second-class soldier in the country's army, and was assigned to support Washio. The guy said he was there to help ease Washio's fatigue from daily training and could do anything, from giving Washio a deep massage with a happy ending to showing him around the kingdom, to doing anything as crazy as Washio could imagine. Washio didn't get the guy's deal because he seemed obviously too excited and was waiting for a super cool order, so Washio just asked him to tell him about his favorite restaurant. From that moment, they had fun working together as Washio trained hard in magic and physical skills. This happened until the night before the big day, on which Washio had trained hard and was exhausted, while Scara gave him a massage, telling him tomorrow was the big day to kickstart the operation to reclaim their city. The boy expressed his confidence in Washio, but told him not to be late and to show up at his best. So Washio asked Scara what his experience was like on the battlefield and whether it was scary. Scara said it was indeed frightening because one's life was on the line. Washio told him not to worry because it would protect him, but Scara said that Washio was the frontline fighter and he was just support, so it would be him protecting Washio, not the other way round. Also, Washio told Scara to drop the honorifics because they were friends after all, and the guy looked shocked. So Washio explained that Scara was nice to him, probably because it was his job, but he did seem like a genuinely good guy who could be nice as a friend to Washio. Scara was excited and said he had been hoping they would get closer outside of just mission stuff, and he even asked if Washio would accept being called Washio's son, because at least it was obvious Washio was older than him. With that, Scara said that after the big operation, they should grab some food together again. The day of the battle finally arrived, and the battle was intense, with everyone playing at their best while Washio himself tried to cast destructive magical spells. However, right before his very eyes, Scara died. Back in his current world, Washio woke up sweating profusely, realizing he had had a nightmare and seeing that he would protect the monsters in Scara's place. Meanwhile, there was Julius and Draco getting all cozy. The next day, Arya was instructed by Draco to call for Washio because the principal was requesting his presence. In front of the panel, Julius read the allegations against Washio, stating that Washio was affiliated with the Perdizio Kingdom's Magic Corp and participated in an urban reclamation operation, during which they raided a monster sanctuary, abducting 6 creatures held there, which were then subjected to brainwashing education in an attempt to weaponize them as biological tools of war. Julius asked Washio if he had any objection to the charges, but Washio said there was no mistake at all in what he claimed. The staff and everyone around judged him, while the chairman, the president of the parent association, said that such a heinous criminal like Washio had no place among teachers, and for the sake of their students, they would have to terminate his employment immediately. Meanwhile, Arya was looking gloomy and defeated, so Draco asked her why she looked so depressed. Arya said she was worried about Washio because she wasn't sure whether the misunderstandings could be cleared up properly. Draco said that Arya was being too overprotective with Washio, but Arya asked her why she didn't seem worried about him at all, and so Draco said that she wasn't really worried, and it didn't matter to her if Washio quit teaching or whatever would happen to him at all. Arya called her a cold-hearted witch, saying it was a major crisis involving their mentor and the one who saved their lives, no less. But the psychopathic girl burst out laughing hysterically, saying Arya had such a ridiculous head on her shoulders, and it was expected from the clueless Dumbo. She then grabbed her, telling her to get a clue already, as their very existence was tormenting Washio. Arya asked her what she meant, but just then, Washio gloomily walked in through the door, and Draco said that was perfect timing, and they could ask him directly. She then asked him whether he thought all the commotion was happening because of them, but Washio had no response at all, and the light in his eyes was dimmed. His memory traveled back to all the monsters he had in his care, and he admitted that indeed it was their fault that he had gone through hell. He said he went through so much trouble to hide his past and live a quiet, low-key life, but thanks to them, the monster girls sticking around him, everything came out in the open, and if he had known that that would happen from the very start, he would never have saved them back then. Hearing this, Arya broke down and cried her eyes out, and then Draco told her that at least now she understood. Alice tried talking to Washio, but he said they would talk later. Soon, the whole school had heard that Washio got fired, and people had lots to say, calling him an old geezer who brainwashed people and murdered them, and was also influencing the monster girls like some horror movie villain. Lim escorted Washio out of the school, but Washio said that it was pretty kind, even though it was odd. So he asked her formally to take over as the new advisor for the monster girls, because even though the girls were a bit spoiled, they were all good girls. Lim asked Washio if he really brainwashed the monster girls, and Washio admitted that it was true. For that reason, Lim said that she had mocked Washio endlessly until that day, but if what Washio claimed was the truth, then she utterly despised him for that. With that, they both went their separate ways. In the morning, Lim was the new homeroom teacher to Arya and Claudia, but neither was in the mood for a lecture. She announced that the Washio faction had been disbanded, and they should leave the tower promptly, as their lectures would now be under her supervision. But neither of the girls answered her, and all remained in their sulky state. However, Lim told them that sulking wouldn't change a thing, and they shouldn't be late for their first class, which was linguistics. Later in class, Julius approached Lim, asking her how it felt to finally have monster girls as her students. He also said he knew how much trouble they were giving her, and they were quite the handful. So he handed her a taming potion for monsters, but Lim didn't particularly want it and said there was no need and she would win them over with her words, because they were monster girls after all. Julius huffed, knowing Lim's ego was bigger than her elf ears. Later, a student approached him with the classroom logbook, and he gave her the graded homework assignments to hand over to everyone when she had the chance. Meanwhile, in the Washio faction dormitory, the girls sadly spoke about how their time living there went by in the blink of an eye. There were still some of Washio's belongings that they didn't know where to keep because he had disappeared without a trace. Claudia said they should just throw it out, but Medusa said they couldn't throw out the grimoires because they were historic treasures, and she also didn't want to be abandoned. But the girls said no one could use the grimoires anymore, and Washio had already handled the research presentations, and since their faction was gone, there was no need to continue their research. Just then, Frederick stopped by as an unwelcome guest, saying he was there to help them pack. He walked over to Claudia, saying he could tell that Washio's shadow was still haunting her, but he would heal her heart because they were destined to be together. He also said he would gather Washio's belongings and send them to him, but she said he should stop, because doing something like that would only bother Washio. Frederick was surprised, saying he was pretty sure Claudia would still want to see Washio, but Claudia said that it was because she came to the academy that things turned out badly for Washio, and she wouldn't want to cause any more trouble. However, Frederick looked beyond her fake smiles and giggles, saying he didn't want to see such a look on her face, because it was obvious she still believed in Washio. He also said that if Washio was really innocent, then they should uncover the truth together. Mob looked at him and said if they uncovered the truth, there had to be something in it for him. And so Frederick charmingly said that he was definitely going to benefit from seeing them smile. Medusa called him a cheesy man who was ripping lines right off a Korean drama. Mob said she was also in favor of uncovering the truth because everything felt absurd, and she was frustrated. Arya also said that she wanted to uncover the truth even though Washio's words hurt her deeply. The only one who said nothing was Claudia, but they eventually sat down and started to analyze everything, beginning from the accusation letter, so they could find the sender of the letter. Even though the letter was written with a typewriter and had no one's handwriting, Arya suspected that the writer of the letter would be Lim. However, upon rereading the letter, Mob noticed that it could have been written by Julius because Julius had the habit of adding dots at the end of sentences. Frederick said that alone wasn't enough evidence, and Arya said that they didn't even know for sure that the culprit was a teacher. However, Medusa said that Julius was the pharmacology teacher, and if it was him, then he was likely a suspect because she could pick up a faint smell of chemicals on the letter. Later, the students sneaked into Julius's private room to investigate their findings. When they were in, the Medusa snake said she would sneak into the room and find proof that Julius sent the letter. And she also told the others to check for a typewriter or proof that could tie Julius to the letter. While they were all at it, everyone was on edge because that was their first time breaking into someone else's room. Soon, Claudia came across a typewriter, which the Medusa snake confirmed was what Julius used to write the accusation letter. The Medusa snake said that Julius sent the letter because it smelled just like the letter, and the ink matched as well. To avoid relying on ink smell alone, Claudia suggested finding stronger evidence, so Medusa said they should test the components themselves. Frederick handed them the accusation letter so they could match it, and Arya pointed out that the distinctive font matched perfectly, as well as the wax seal, and no physical evidence had piled up. So all they needed was a draft of the accusation letter, but there was nothing of that nature in the trash. But just when they were about to give up, Claudia spotted something which turned out to be results from investigating Washio's background. And there were 2 copies. The first copy said Washio didn't attack a monster protection facility because it was a monster experimentation lab. And from there, he rescued 6 young monsters. Arya confirmed that that was the truth of what happened, although calling the place an experimentation lab was undermining how terrible it was. However, it was basically the same as the accusation letter claiming that Washio attacked and kidnapped from a monster protection facility. And when Medusa perceived the same ink from the accusation letter, she confirmed that it was definitely Julius's fabrication. And when Claudia went through everything and remembered Washio's, she was overwhelmed by her emotions and burst out crying. However, Arya wasn't entirely convinced and felt this trap was a little too convenient. Medusa said they should take the evidence and get out because Julius was back. And coincidentally, Mob encountered Julius in the hallway, saying she had a question about a lesson. However, he seemed in a hurry and said it had to wait until later. Since her plans to stall him had failed, Medusa let the other guys know that she couldn't stall him, and it was too late. However, the moment Julius walked into his room, there was no one in sight, as all the students were hidden under the desk containing the typewriter. Julius walked in their direction, and everyone was panicked, but not Frederick, because his head was buried in heaven. It seemed he was very close to catching them, but only moved to his typewriter and typed some things, after which he left the room. Thereafter, Claudia crawled out, and the others followed suit, relieved that they were in court and planning to hurry and get out before Julius would return. When Claudia noticed, there was a space under the floor, and while everyone left, they called her to follow suit so they could submit the fake investigation reports to the principal and restore Washio's honor. Unfortunately, they couldn't get so far, as the moment the door opened, Julius was standing right there in front of them, holding Mob by her fragile arm and pushing her in. He pointed out that they noticed the smell of the ink, and he was quite surprised that they got there earlier than he expected. He was also glad they collected all the evidence and was worried they might catch on to what it was. Finally, he called them all fools and said their stupidity put his mind at ease. Frederick, the father of all simps, rowdily claimed that Julius should own up to his crime like a man, since he had been caught. But before everyone knew anything, Claudia walked up to Julius and handed over the reports, almost as though she had been hypnotized. When Claudia handed him the documents, she noticed her head felt fuzzy. She had no focus, and her body was refusing to move. Arya was calling her to her senses, but none of that was working, as they soon noticed that none of them could move. Arya noticed that everyone was frozen in place with eyes glazed over, like they had been mentally caged. She asked Julius what he had done to her friends, because he was obviously behind what was wrong with them. But before Arya could do anything, her hands were moving sporadically, and she brought herself down to her knees. Thereafter, Julius told her that his magic didn't work well on monsters, so he had them restrained while they were still humanoid. In front of her, the piece of garbage burned the only evidence they had against him to a crisp. But the guy was only happy to see the look of despair in Arya's eyes, saying that despair was a gift he loved, and a privilege granted only to those who possessed self-awareness within their minds. And in the end, despair from any source or reason would eventually lead to death, because it was a sickness that started eating people up while in their lifetime. For him, the minds of monster girls and their despair were fascinating topics, so he wondered more about Arya's beautiful despair. Just then, he brought out something sharp like the needle of a sword, but Medusa rushed and bit him on the finger, sending the bottle to the ground. That was when Arya and Claudia both noticed something was off. Arya asked what he was about to do, but while Angelus forcefully tried to inject whatever it was into Arya, by then, Claudia's consciousness had returned, and she warned him to get away from her. But with one single look from him and a maneuvering of the ring on his finger, Claudia's head felt fuzzy again, and her body couldn't move. Claudia extended her tentacles to stop him, so Medusa attempted to bite Julius and stop him so that Claudia could run, but somehow this could not stop him, and he was almost injecting whatever it was into her neck. However, Draco burst into the room, seeing that she wanted them to go out for a bite. With the broken door handle in her hand, she looked quite suspicious. On the other hand, Julius was almost caught in 4K, so he left the room, but not until after snapping his finger and setting everyone free from his mental chokehold. When they all came to regain consciousness, everyone was confused, and Draco warned them not to stick their necks into that business any further. Claudia said that there was no way they would stop them from exposing Julius, but Draco said that if Claudia loved Washio that much, she shouldn't have left his side at all. With that, Claudia had a dumb light bulb moment and carried her massive balloons to pay Washio a visit. Everyone laughed because Claudia remained the same old girl ever since. And when she was gone, Draco said Washio was in a tight spot and it was their turn to help him. Coincidentally, the scene changed, showing Washio looking quite ragged and haggard, being attended to by Alice, who offered to bathe him and scrub his body. He insisted he didn't want her help, but she said it was part of her duties, and she had also learned that human touch was the best comfort for him in such times. She also lay on the bed, reminding him that she had reproductive capabilities, and if he simply gave the command, there would be a flood down there. It turned out that Washio was working in an inn. An old man there said he was working because he was young, but Washio claimed he wasn't that young, and it only suited him to work at an inn. However, the old man noted that Washio was obviously a famous teacher at the Magic Academy before, who was said to be too laid back and boring. And Washio said his present vibe was the best for him because back at the academy, he was exhausted and taking responsibility for students' futures, and so he was glad the old man let him live there and work for him. Alice pointed out that his last comment wasn't sincere, not what he said to the old man, but about Claudia and Arya, meaning he had regrets about leaving the academy. Washio claimed he didn't, but Alice pointed out that his eye movements and excessive sweating made her know he was lying to her. Eventually, he pulled out a cigarette and said he did regret leaving the academy, although he wished he had quit sooner, because he was the reason why the girls were dragged into unnecessary hardships. He was currently cutting ties because he wanted them to find happiness in a life that had nothing to do with him, because teaching wasn't suited for someone like him, and because being freed from the responsibility of his students felt like a huge relief. Alice asked him if that meant he wanted nothing to do with Arya and Claudia, and after thinking deeply, Washio said he really didn't want to get involved with them for their own good. Alice deep down didn't agree with him, but understood him regardless. As they went to bed that night and Washio was asleep, Alice promised to stay by his side until the very end. In the morning, he resumed his duties of cleaning the inn, but he soon heard a loud noise followed by Claudia's melons directed at his innocent face. She gave him no chance to breathe while hitting him aggressively, calling him a stupid old man. He asked how she found him, and she said she tracked the stench of his stinky pits, which was so distinct that no one could miss it. And later, after hitting him hard enough, she broke down crying, asking why he lied and hurt her feelings. With her tears dripping on his face, the old man had to apologize to her. But even after saying sorry, Washio was rewarded with a punch to the face, and Claudia said there was no way she would forgive him. After hugging Washio for what seemed like an eternity, Claudia refused to let him go, even when Alice brought her tea, saying she didn't want him to run off somewhere again. Alice told her to let the poor man breathe so they could have a proper conversation, but the girl said there was no way on earth she was going to do that. After they had tea, Washio was shocked to hear that his background file was forged, and that Julius tried to inject Claudia with some weird stuff after making her head all fuzzy. Instantly, Washio was angry, but his entire body filled him as he tried running towards the academy, especially his old man's spine that almost gave up on him. Claudia offered to carry him to the academy, but Alice did so instead and told Claudia to jump on the ride. She adjusted her engines, setting the academy as their destination and saying they would arrive in 30 minutes. The impact was crazy, and Claudia almost lost her limbs while holding on to dear life. On the way, Washio told Claudia that Julius's goal was to activate the monstral factor in the monster girls. He further explained that the monstral factor was basically like a switch that separated regular creatures from monsters, and once a certain amount was absorbed into a living body, it triggered a dramatic transformation in their physical structure, making it almost impossible to control their aggression. That was what was called monsterization, and it was what Julius aimed at by attempting to inject them with the monstral factor. Washio said that monster girls, when injected with that stuff, probably won't turn into full monsters again, but if the factor were ever to get activated, there was a good chance they would lose control of their aggression. The person in charge of that research facility was one of the kingdom's top-ranking wizards, Silver Crew Julius Spectre. It soon made sense to Washio that the drug activating the monstral factor and a man named Julius whom he had encountered in the world he was summoned to was no coincidence, and he should have realized it sooner rather than later. Claudia asked if it meant that the research lab was theirs. So Alice said that yes, indeed it was, but to protect themselves, Washio locked those memories away, as well as the monster girls. Washio himself admitted there was no way Julius' name wouldn't ring a bell other than Washio running away from the truth. But now, he could no longer keep running from his past and everything that happened back then. Meanwhile, Arya, Draco, and Frederick were hanging out, and Arya asked Draco what she was really after and whether she was a friend or a foe. But Draco said she had already said enough and warned them to stay out of it. While they were still talking, Claudia, Alice, and Washio descended from the sky, and Washio instantly said that Draco had to get out of there because she was Julius's special target. The girl said she was fine, but Washio said there was no way he would leave his precious students in such a dangerous place. He was holding onto her hand when he found out that Julius had dragged her away from him. Unfortunately, Julius told Washio there was nothing he could do because Draco had been injected with the stimulant countless times and had already become his puppet. Although he wondered when she would finally break her defenses, as the poor girl got injected, she screamed in pain and anguish while Washio was pissed to the core. The others were wondering what happened to her, so Arya told Frederick to dash and get the other teachers. The poor girl kept screaming in anguish while Julius smirked demonically. But surprisingly, Draco turned and displayed the goofiest face, saying she was just kidding because there was no way the strongest dragon like her would ever lose control to such a cheap injection. She really wanted to finish everything without Washio noticing anything, but it seemed her plans had been tampered with, and she would have to settle everything right there and then with Julius. Draco told Julius to give up because he had been surrounded completely by monster girls and Washio, but Washio told her he didn't understand what she was talking about. Claudia and Arya were upset at the fact that Draco was their ally all along, but she never told them sooner so they would help her. She apologized for not saying anything to them since she didn't want to get them involved if possible, although they found out anyway. In that case, she decided to reveal her true identity and pulled out an armband, which was the mark of an enforcer that Washio had previously seen. That pin had the kingdom's crest, so Julius explained that it meant Draco was an enforcer on special orders from the Royal Academy known as the Order. Furthermore, Draco said that she was a member of the Order and came to the school to investigate Julius. It turned out that 20 years ago, he stole and fled with the results of the monstral factor research from the Prodizio Research Institute, and she did all sorts of things to gather enough evidence to convict him as the same individual as Julius Spector. So thanks to his numerous injections, she had enough. She asked Julius if he was surprised that the factor didn't activate, and she got past it quite easily, but he was quiet. The angry monster girls asked just how many times Julius dared to inject it, and Draco said that it was about 4 times, but it didn't do anything other than make her skin pop. So it turned out that she had received special training. Otherwise, like any other person, when the factor activator is injected, all the person's muscles will spasm at once and become so lethargic that they couldn't move at all. All that while, Draco was acting so perfectly and had Julius so completely fooled that even he admitted it. He was even upset because they had kissed before, meaning that all the dates and sweetness Draco had shown him were all an act. All the students there were disgusted at how shameless Draco was for kissing someone she didn't like for the sake of an investigation. But Draco swore that she never kissed Julius, and he was only idly chattering. Anyway, she told him to give up and accept his arrest. But Julius said that it was stupid for her to think she had outsmarted him, because the factor activator he had been administering to her was made to grow stronger by the day. At that time, it was already ready to start working. That instant, Draco's body went through all sorts of electrifying movements, and Washio rushed over to calm her down. But before he knew it, she had started getting into her beast form and grabbed his face, at the same time releasing some black stuff from her body. Everyone wondered whether she had gone into berserk mode, while Julius was only excited that his experiment was a success, and he was finally going to see more of Draco's despair. With Draco in berserk mode, the whole school was in trouble, so Lim instructed all the students to follow the evacuation protocol and exit the school building. Right then, Draco became even more aggressive and started breathing fire everywhere, unable to hear or heed the words of Claudia and Arya as they tried to calm her down. Julius told them to save their breath because their voices wouldn't reach Draco anymore, since once the monster factor went berserk, even Julius couldn't stop it. The end result was that it was only a matter of time before the school or the whole city would turn into a sea of flames, and only a certain golden eagle could stop an almighty dragon. While in the clutches of her dragon claws, Washio tried waking Draco up, asking her not to give in. Alice jumped, propelling herself towards him to rescue him, and instantly Washio dropped to the ground, although barely alive. He tried telling Draco to return to her senses, but Arya immediately fell to the ground, spun some silk, and tied her down, and then Claudia used her tentacles to try knocking her out. However, this failed woefully, as Claudia's tentacles were chopped off, and Draco immediately breathed out the most intense beam of fire, which burnt right through the top floor of the school building and the fortress behind. Everyone, the students and teachers alike, watched in dismay as their entire academy was burnt to the ground and marveled, or were terrified as they finally realized the extent of Draco's power as a dragon. Even Arya, a fellow monster, couldn't believe such an extent of strength existed, while Claudia broke down crying profusely, begging Draco to return to normal. Seeing the next ball of fire come from forming her mouth, Arya warned Claudia to run away. But before she could do anything, it was already too late, and Draco had already targeted it in her direction. Claudia was already anticipating her death and being burnt to smoke, but found out that she remained intact. The next thing she saw was a huge, muscular structure belonging to none other than Washio. Julius asked him not to use his power there because he would be chased by the kingdom again. But Washio said that, unlike Julius, who was a fake, useless teacher, Washio would protect his students with all their might. Turning his attention to Draco, Washio screamed as loudly as he could, telling her he would soon save her and she should exercise a bit of patience. He commanded the summon to handle her, but Julius told him that his attempts to save her were pointless because there was no way to turn a berserk monster back to normal, and it would keep going wild until it died. So his best bet was to end her life already. Julia and Washio turned to the stupid boy, telling him to turn Draco back to normal, but Julius reminded him that he didn't even know how to go about it. In the midst of their argument, Draco summoned more fireballs and kept pouring them down, including one she targeted at Washio and his summon. He tried to calm her down and tell her to take a deep breath, but he soon realized even Buddha couldn't calm her down if he tried. And so he decided to try something different. With his thumb, he stretched towards her and a massive explosion occurred. However, Draco remained unscathed, and everyone was surprised that Washio's spell had no effect on her. Alice explained that the reason for this was that dragon skills had absolute magical defense barriers that blocked most magical attacks. So the only way to defeat a dragon was to use firearms or cast a spell strong enough to break through its magic barrier. Considering Washio's image of magic power, he could conceivably penetrate the barrier, but doing so might end Draco's life. While they were still talking, Julius popped up from behind them, asking if they knew what an almighty dragon's strongest weapon was. He mocked them for thinking it was the dragon's magic barrier or enormous physical strength, because the strongest weapon was the dragon's flame breath. At this instant, Washio was the next target of Draco's flame shower. She tried to rescue him, but Alice held her back and soothed her by saying that, despite the high temperature of a dragon's fire, one wouldn't die instantly by just coming in contact with it. And it was a prolonged exposure to the heated air that raised one's chances of dying. At the same time, inhaling the carbon monoxide that was produced by the flames could eventually also lead to death by asphyxiation. At that time, Washio was still standing on his feet, although he couldn't see much through the excess smoke. Alice explained that, bearing all the factors that could protect Washio from Draco's flame attacks, he had protected himself not only physically, but also by protecting the air flow and humidity he was inhaling. Both girls attacked in Draco's direction, but Julius found it funny that they were attacking the moment they confirmed Washio's safety. None of Claudia's tentacles could touch him, no matter how hard she tried, and neither did Alice's explosives. At this point, everyone was shocked and wondered just who Julius was. And so, Lim appeared, saying Julius was an astral body, which was a state in which one lived without a body and only lived with the spirit. As such, none of their attacks would work on him because there was no physical body. Also, that was Lim's first time encountering such a thing, so she didn't know how best to approach the matter. And even added that it was likely that Julius had already passed away. Before their very eyes, he vanished. And Lim said that Julius's true identity was most likely that of a lick. And among them, he was the most powerful undead who had transcended their physical body, known as a lifeless king. If that was really true, then defeating Julius was impossible. On the other hand, Washio was barely staying alive, surviving Draco's brutal attacks. But she was far gone, and the intensity of her flames only grew by the minute. Terrified, Washio protected himself from a massive attack that dispersed in all directions. But he was aware that if it kept going on, the entire city would be destroyed. He activated a skill, haste, and bolted in her direction to stop her. At the same time, Alice made some calculations and tried shooting lasers at Julius, but none of her attacks could do anything to him and only left holes within him while his ugly face maintained its evil smile. Arya soon accepted that, truly, their attacks were worthless and useless on Julius, and he confirmed her fears, saying it was just as Lim said, that no one could destroy him, and not even the power within the monster girls could touch him. Claudia, after failing to do anything with her tentacles, got disgusted and asked Lim to help them out with a solution because she was irritated by that idiot. Lim shared that the astral body was a spiritual body existing as the opposite of the physical and could not be interacted with from their own world, as it only existed in the astral world. However, Arya found it unfair that such astral bodies could interact with their own world while they couldn't interact with them. While the girls were moping at the fact that they wouldn't be able to defeat the idiot, they noticed something terrible coming from Julius's mouth. Claudia noticed it smelled strange, so Alice told them it was a corrosive gas spell and they should refrain from breathing it in. It was already too late for Claudia, who was already getting high on hormones and stripped of everything on her body. On the other hand, Washio kept jetting towards Draco and calling her name with the loudest voice possible, but she used her tail to hit him. It turned out she had only hit a mirror image of him, and by the time that happened, Washio held Draco in his arms, reassuring her everything was okay. After he held her, he used his telepathy skill, and while she was surrounded by dark shadows, he dispersed them all, telling her it was him and that he was sorry for making her wait. Draco opened her eyes, still in Washio's arms, and cried as she apologized for everything. She asked if he could remember who she was, and Washio said he could tell that she had grown up. Afterwards, Draco introduced herself as Radon, the monster girl he had saved back then. On the other hand, Arya and Alice were getting pissed off because Julius had proven rather impossible to defeat. So Claudia asked Lim if Julius had a weakness, and Lim said that elder liches couldn't completely change into an astral form, so their souls had to exist in some shape or form somewhere near the astral body, so they could receive magical power. In most circumstances, such forms were in accessories or something similar that is worn on their body, but for some reason, Lim hadn't been able to pick anything up using his magic detection. He said the item Julius was using to hide his form was certainly not too far away, but there wasn't enough time for them to look. He asked Arya if she had any feeling of where it could be, but Julius suddenly drew nearer, telling them it was quite stupid of them to be having a strategy meeting in front of their enemy. The next thing they knew, he attacked Claudia, but Lim ran to and took the hit for the girl, falling instantly. She told Claudia not to worry about her at all and, more importantly, to find the location of Julius's soul vessel, which could have been in a hidden room or somewhere of the sort. It was then, in that moment, that Claudia remembered that while she was in Julius's room, she encountered a space under the floorboards which she wanted to explore. Lim told her that if that was really what she felt, then she should go there at once, and everything was being left in her hands. With that, Lim's eyes were shut, and she lost consciousness, and Claudia immediately dashed to find what she was looking for. Julius asked her where she was going, trying to stop her, but Arya and Alice told Claudia to proceed as she wanted, because they would be dealing with Julius in the meantime. Soon, she arrived at his room and broke the floorboards with her tentacles. Underneath the floorboards, she found a hidden staircase and ventured into the unknown. The staircase was a long, downward spiral, but Claudia eventually made it to the base. There, she saw a ring suspended by some dark magic, but the moment she attempted to touch it, a skull head attacked her from above, and so did many other skeletons. She panicked, shouting for help, but soon smiled and said she was just kidding. She countered the skeleton's limbs and all at once broke them all by enveloping them with her tentacles. Thereafter, she finished it off with a nice kick to the head, and it was as good as gone. Meanwhile, Alice had been beaten so severely that she was on the floor, but she still told Arya to get up and run for her life. Arya looked so terrified and in despair that Julius was satisfied at the level of despair in her face. But while he was still excited, Washio stomped on his face from an angle, a direct hit that would have finished him if he weren't an astral body. Arya was glad that both Washio and Draco were okay, but they asked her what had happened to her, considering that she was almost completely undressed. They all checked on each other, and Washio also found out that Rim was unconscious. All the while, Julius was fuming and shocked that Washio's missile could touch him, but he knew it couldn't be the ring already. To his utmost shock, Claudia was returning victoriously from his house, and so he got upset as heck and swallowed something, thereafter revealing his full monster form. He then said he was going to give them one last lesson as their teacher, which would be to teach them all the heights of despair. But that same instant, Washio chanted a prayer that circled his body with beautiful flowers of light, and ended the chant by saying a flower of hope will bloom brighter. And that was what teachers were supposed to teach, not just their students but also themselves. When he was done, so many bodies of light sent numerous beams piercing Julius's body, and he couldn't believe that his new body was already dissipating. Eventually, he withered away until he was reduced to nothing, and Julius stood there basking in his victory, having gained 1 billion aura points for defeating the king of the undead. With all that has transpired, will things ever return to normal in the academy? Type aura for another part of this series. Give a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel for similar content. As always, thanks for watching.